possibly, assuming that it was an attack, as well as the backdrop. You brought up the central bank, the management of the central bank. This, I believe, you're talking about Riyad Salameh. How would you pronounce that?
Yes, Riyad Salameh. Yes.
Salameh, thank you. And you said that he had. I just want to go back because you were laying out some of the sort of history there, and maybe we can go back further in a minute. The history of French colonization, relationship with France. You're saying Macron is coming to visit this coming week, but first, with the economy and with the media, you fingered Saudi Arabia and Qatar as key countries in Lebanon's media space. With Lebanon's economic space, you're talking about the central bank as the key agent. I was going to say this key agent, but really it's the principal agent other than the government in determining Lebanon's fiscal policy, its economy, the future of its economy. And you're saying that there's some intentional destabilization, at least that's what I was hearing going on. Could you get a little bit deeper into what you've seen over the course of the last 26, 27 years since Riyad Salameh has been in power, or Salameh has been in power?
Yes, so he was brought in with the Hariri dynasty into power at the end of the civil war, and he hasn't been moved from his position. So imagine if, no matter who was in power in the country, presidents or prime ministers, and who's in parliament, this person had the final say on anything that happens financially in the country. And, foreign powers like France and the United States didn't allow any government, no matter who got elected, to change the course of the country's financial and physical realm. With this guy being in power, even during last year when the demonstrations were at their height, and people were demonstrating daily outside the central bank and calling for his resignation, actually the American ambassador openly said that nobody can touch him, and that if this guy is removed from his position, Lebanon will have to pay for it, basically. And so you have foreign control of the financial sector. Any bank that was trying to do something good was sanctioned by the United States. There was at least 3 banks that got bankrupt because of sanctions that, by the United States, because they were not following the fiscal policy that Mr. Salameh and the imperial powers wanted. And then you had now, after those 3 banks that were more friendly just to the population were out of the market, you had these banks, siphon out the money from the country with the help of the central bank into foreign accounts, and crash the economy, basically. The Lebanese lira.
Just one second there on that issue. What were those 3 banks? Could you just go a little bit deeper? What was the timeline here? What's the sort of wider context for what you're talking about there?
I haven't memorized the names of the 3 banks, but they were smaller banks that were giving lower rate loans that were supporting national projects that are there to build up the industries and all small businesses. And the United States at the time claimed that these banks were somehow related to Hezbollah, or where Hezbollah, members are putting their money, which is, a ridiculous claim, because Hezbollah doesn't put money in banks. It's smart enough to have its money outside the banking system. And so the intention of that was to, break those banks that were trying to, break the monopoly on banking in the country that is controlled by Western powers and the Gulf states. So that's in terms of the banking system. It's impossible to understand how a government cannot control its fiscal policy and cannot choose who's its central bank manager. Somebody from outside the country has a veto on it.
Laith, what are the objectives of the various people involved? I mean, in one case, we're talking about people who are internal, like this banking person who, for whatever reason, a sovereign government can't get rid of an individual that's part of that government. And for that matter, protesters. What do they want? Meaning, what are their demands? What are the things they're trying to accomplish? And outside actors. I mean, is it the implosion of Lebanon? Or is it installing somebody that basically will be a puppet government of Western powers? Like, what's the point? I'm trying to understand the various intentions and the incentives or the objectives of the people involved in this kind of, I guess you can say, Game of Thrones. They have real world consequences in regard to the harm it's causing human beings.
Yes. Well, look, the resistance movement, Hezbollah, here in the country, has managed to save Lebanon from being affected by the Arab Autumn, what some people call the Arab Spring, this wave of colored revolutions that led to either Wahhabi Contras creating, death fields and rape factories across Libya, Syria, and Iraq, and Yemen, and or a takeover by Muslim Brotherhood and or liberal powers that are, loyal to the imperial positions. So for this last 10 years, Lebanon was saved from this wave. And at some point, it seems like there was an agreement with the Western powers to keep Lebanon out of this mess that they were creating. But now that they've lost the war on Syria, Syria is coming back to its full power. It's liberating its lands. The only way to affect the situation in Syria and make it worse was to collapse the Lebanese economy, because Lebanon and all the trade that goes between the two countries, and the fact that many of the middle class and upper class of Syria had their money in Lebanon, in Lebanese banks. So crashing the Lebanese economy and adding all these layers of sanctions on, and the Caesar Act basically blocking the any trade between the two countries, meant that not only the Lebanese population lost their money and the worth of it. So now it's 1/10 the worth of what anybody, if you had something in the bank, now it's 1/10 of what it was worth. But also the Syrian middle class and upper class lost their life savings that kept, the country in Syria itself, still surviving economically. So that's the main intention of these incidents, one after another, in Lebanon, is to, ultimately the goal is Syria, but they can't do that without crashing Lebanon. And at this moment, if the state collapses in Lebanon, then it is easier to create forces that will be in direct confrontation with Hezbollah on the ground here in Lebanon. And this is what we've been seeing in the last week, hints to reviving the Wahhabi Contra threat inside Lebanon, but not anymore just on the border with Syria, but in the middle of the cities and the main living areas, populated areas. I think you asked also about the demonstrators, and this is where, we have to, on the one hand, recognize that the demonstrators, people in general are fed up. They're lost their life savings. They're getting hungry. They want change. But how that is being manipulated into, instead of targeting the crooks in the banking system and the manager of the central bank and the external forces that are affecting the economy, they're trying to manipulate it with this mass media that is controlled by the Gulf countries here in Lebanon, to manipulate it towards attacking Hezbollah, blaming Hezbollah for everything. And we've seen that in the last few weeks, especially after the explosion.
So this is the propaganda. Basically, they say, look, Hezbollah, this force that basically protects your country, is somehow connected with the bomb blast. That doesn't entirely make sense to me. I mean, what's the logic that they're trying to use to make that connection between Hezbollah and the bombs? Just the media itself creating an image and a narrative of that?
Yeah, I mean, if you repeat a lie long enough, sometimes people believe it and it becomes the truth. So although there is, clear evidence that Hezbollah doesn't use not only the port of Beirut, but doesn't use any official ports to transport its weapons and or bring money to the country. And that includes, last year, Netanyahu, the prime minister of apartheid Israel, claimed at the United Nations that Hezbollah is using the port and the airport to store weapons. And at the time, the foreign affairs minister of Lebanon immediately opened all these warehouses that Netanyahu pointed out on the map to foreign journalists, and they saw everything that's there, and there's no Hezbollah weapons. And also, the general secretary of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, came out in a speech and said, we don't use these ports. We have our own ways to getting our equipment into the country, their weapons. And everybody knows that the main route for that is coming from Syria, so you don't bring it through the ports. So it is illogical to try to blame Hezbollah for the explosion.
But let me interrupt you 1 second, because we're only going to have about 2 minutes left, and I really want to get this question in because I have no other way to get this information. What is it like? Like, Macron comes to the country. Lebanon used to be a colony of France, and you guys are supposedly sovereign, and yet as he comes to this country, what is the feeling towards him from the people who are there? And beyond what's the feeling towards him, how does Lebanon relate to France now, just in the way that they go about their typical operations? And I saw that there were several people that wanted France to impose some kind of rule back on them. And I was astonished by that. Can you explain that? I was just fascinated by the entire dynamic.
Yeah, so there was some paid agents that are members of the Kata'ib party and the Phalange, the two Christian supremacist militias that were responsible for a lot of the slaughter during the Civil War, that came out and pretended to be regular citizens during that visit of Macron. And now people have named them and shown which parties they belong to and how high up they are in those parties, and pretended to be wanting France to come back and take control of the country and colonize it again. And so this does not represent the Lebanese people. And in fact, people are disgusted at this, action of the Phalange and the Kata'ib party. And I think what is funny about this is that, the last time France and the United States tried to reoccupy Lebanon in 1982, hundreds of soldiers, American and French, were liquidated in just a few bombings. And now they're going to come back. If they try to come back and occupy here, they're going to have the same outcome.
Sad to hear. Hope that doesn't happen. Thank you for joining us. That was the voice of Laith Marouf. We'll be back in a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Welcome to your home. I apologize. Welcome to your home against propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, the last man on the wall, with my co-host Shane Stranahan, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the politically independent corner, out on the West Coast, not sure where I am. Sometimes I'm sitting on a veranda. Sometimes I'm like sitting on a mountain. I think I'll be sitting on a mountainside. That's where I am this morning. I'm sitting on a mountainside, meditating. That just sounds great. All right, that's where I am. Independent political analyst and investigative radio show host, Shane Stranahan.
You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Man, I butchered that. I was at the wrong...
No, man, here's the thing. You just gave me permission to be a little bit more creative.
Right. That was the other part, right? Me screwing it up so bad. It wasn't the energy. It wasn't the, and so it's like you could just do your thing. No, I apologize, guys. My mind, I was looking at the script, but I was looking at the script in a different place, and it just totally threw me off. But let's get to the headlines. So, in the news, President Trump spoke at the White House lawn last night, accepting the Republican nomination for the presidency, in a more than 70-minute speech focusing on American greatness and end to the coronavirus and reducing violence in the streets. Protested outside the White House, with confrontations between protesters and police. Senator Rand Paul said he had to be escorted to safety by police through an angry crowd of protesters while attending an event in the White House. 25% of Louisiana's without power after Hurricane Laura wrecked the city of Lake Charles and the strip of land to its south. 6 deaths have been confirmed. There have been more than 800,000 power outages in the state, and more than 220,000 residents in the state are dealing with the effects of 67 water system outages. President Trump says he will be visiting Louisiana following the effects of the Hurricane Laura to address recovery, likely this weekend. The teen involved in the Kenosha shooting, Kyle Rittenhouse, has been charged with 6 criminal counts. First degree intentional homicide on Wednesday. Then on Thursday, he was charged with 1 count of reckless homicide, a count of attempted intentional homicide, 2 counts of recklessly endangering safety, and possession of a dangerous weapon while under the age of 18, which is a misdemeanor penalty. Rittenhouse is currently in custody of Lake County Judicial System in Illinois, awaiting extradition to Wisconsin. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will step down from his leadership from the country, citing health care problems, specifically with the consequences of having chronic ulcerative colitis. Abe has been Prime Minister since the end of 2012. More than 1 million Americans have filed for unemployment last week. This is the second week in a row where the unemployment has rose over 1 million people. In addition to the unemployment research from the Economic Policy Institute found that there were more than 12 million people who have lost their health care over the last few months. And one that we didn't get to yesterday, but we have to get to, this is from the Washington Post. We've been waiting for something about Dan Snyder. There was news that was supposed to drop about Dan Snyder. And that news had to do with what we thought had something to do with the behavior internally to the team. We knew it was going to be embarrassing, but we didn't necessarily know what it was. Well, it's dropped, and the Washington Post has released it. I'm just going to read the top 2 paragraphs. In Beauties on the Beach, the official video chronicling the making of the Washington NFL team's 2008 cheerleader swimsuit calendar, the women frolic in the sand, rave about their custom bikinis, and praise the photographers for putting them at ease in a setting where sometimes only a strategically placed prop or tightly framed shot shielded otherwise bare breast. What the cheerleaders didn't know was that another video, intended strictly for private use, would be produced using footage from the same shoot, set to classic rock, 10-minute unofficial video featuring moments where nipples were inadvertently exposed as the women shifted positions or adjusted props. The lewd outtakes were Larry Michael and the team's lead broadcaster and senior vice president, referred to as the good bits or the good parts, according to Brad Baker, a former member of Michael's staff. Baker said in an interview that he was present when Michael told staffers to make the video for the owner, Dan Snyder. Snyder and the team provided no comment when they were questioned. Those were your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Yeah, that story has been teased for a while, and we've been waiting for that story to come out. And so the Washington Post apparently just put this out, I think it was a day or so ago. And yeah, it's sleazy. Yeah, it's sleazy. I mean, to put it mildly. These guys are making a video of women who were there to do a job. And I understand that the job is nudity. I don't care what that job is. They're there to do a job. They're paid to be there for that specific purpose. That does not include the secondary video that they did not know about, where their nipples and everything else was exposed, and it was going to be used for salacious, sleazy action. Like, that's a foul, right? And so, no pun intended. But Snyder, people expected this, but they didn't know what exactly it was. And basically, it's the people who were talking about the sexist environment in the context of that football club. So, I don't watch football anymore. I haven't watched football in a long time. But I think, are you a sports guy, Shane?
Not too much.
Okay.
No. I like it. I like going out to baseball, but no, I haven't been following this too closely. I hadn't seen this drop. No, thank you for posting this. This is a big deal. Up until you got to the actual big deal, I was like, okay, wait, what is this? You know what I mean? Is this just, are they going after them for doing the almost nude photo shoot? Because that happens constantly. But that's privately circulated, privately filmed video. That's pretty transgressive in a way that, you know, is non-consensual and not cool. So yeah, this does seem like the thing. This is going to be a big deal. I'm curious. We should get somebody on to talk about sports. Between this, the NBA with Black Lives Matter, just a bunch of things happening right now. It'd be interesting.
Oh.
You there, Jamarl?
Oh, I'm here. Can you hear me? Hello?
I can.
Oh,
yeah. It seemed like it cut out for a second.
Speaking of Black Lives Matter, there's research that has just come out that is getting polling on the attitudes of the people in Wisconsin. It is utterly fascinating. I posted it in the thing so you could see it. But basically, it's asking people, what did you think about X back then? So let's say in June. And what do you think about it now? And in doing that, they're trying to get to this thing of trying to say, all right, how have attitudes changed? What has been the momentum of the change? Now, the most interesting part to this, now, the Jacob Blake stuff, if I'm not mistaken, hadn't happened yet. So the poll doesn't necessarily include that. But they ask various questions. The views on the protests over the police killings. You have 61% approve, 36% disapprove. Meaning, do you approve of the protests? In June, it was 61%. Now, 48%. It dropped. Do you approve of Black Lives Matter protests by race? Now, back in June, it was 59% approve, 39% disapprove. Now, when they go to white, and that's the white vote, meaning back in June, whites looked at it and says, yeah, we approve of these guys. How can we not? They murdered the guy, right? Now, it goes to 45% and 51%, meaning it's inverted. So 45% of whites said, yeah, I approve. 51% said, yeah, this has gone too far. Now, I'm going to bring you in on this to get your guess vote. Let's get your guess vote. How many African Americans back in June approved of Black Lives Matter protests, the African American vote or Hispanic vote?
You want me to ask either or both? Are you asking about either?
Oh, it's
or
both.
both
They're combining the two because they were so closely related. So either one works. So you can say.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
73%. I don't know.
Oh, you're very close. 77. 77% of African Americans approved, 19% disapproved. Now, that's a gimme, right? Of course. That number would be weird if that number was low. And then, so let's get to the more interesting parts. I did some research yesterday because the article that I was going to do, or the thing I was going to do this morning, I wasn't able to sleep, on Kenosha. And I was trying to figure out what was Wisconsin from the standpoint of class. Do you know that 32% of African Americans in Kenosha are unemployed? The unemployment rate is 32%. For whites, it's 13%. That's astonishing. For the larger part of Wisconsin, the majority of black-led neighborhoods, meaning the areas of Wisconsin that have basically a predominance of African Americans, those are prisons. That's Wisconsin.
Wow.
Like I read that now. It was like, oh my God, I can't believe that's that bad. And it was like 55. It was like something like 30 out of 55 or something like that were just basically jails or prisons. that were basically communities.
Yeah,
where,
no, that's terrible.
that is horrendous. And so it's like this is the environment to which we're talking about. And so when we get to the polling breaks down into this thing of race. But it makes sense now, right? If you have the communities in the neighborhoods, right, that are horrible, that are not that great, and those are the ones where violence is isolated to. You have communities that aren't that bad, in which case they're in a different world. You know, it's like they don't engage in the world in the exact same way that the other side engages in the world, and you see it in the polling. When you ask,
totally, no, they're breathing different air. It's like it's literally everything is different.
Yeah.
The water is different.
It's like a different
fish,
world.
You know, you get used to the water, and we get used to our cultures, and you get used to the environment for your culture. So that definitely applies. But here's a question for you. So I have my own kind of definition, but I'm going to ask you, how would you disambiguate that? You know, like different demographics trying to represent their own interests. How would you disambiguate that from identity politics? What do you see as the difference between the two? Because I do see a difference, but just, I'm curious, what's yours?
Class. The underlying lowest common denominator is class, meaning the problem. All of these. I think part of the thing is when people protest, their energies go to what they can get their hands on, and there's a certain degree of self-justification of the mob in doing so because of whatever had taken place in the context of their life or in the context of culture or anything else. That energy, though, doesn't go into politics because they don't frame it in the political sense. I don't necessarily try to disambiguate it. I look at these things as each person is going to fight for their interests. But the catch is, what do they think their interest is? And you have some people who don't think of those things in terms of class. They're things that bother them or they care about more. My argument is always based in this notion of class, more so than race, because I think all of us, you can hate my guts and still have the exact same interests as me from the standpoint of our economic interests. And so that's how I try to skate that. Like in this situation where you have these kind of racial differences, you have the majority of those people are still, oddly enough, paycheck to paycheck, even white, and even still, most likely, not having $500 in the bank. Now, when you get into these kind of number differences, I think it's like $156,000 compared to like $18,000 to blacks and this type of stuff. But those things, it's hard to make that argument because, again, it affects one more than it affects the other. And so, it's sometimes a difficult thing. But oftentimes, what you find, though, is when the white community is being affected in similar terms, you have allies. And even in these polling, what you see is you have a lot of whites who say, I agree with this, even now. And so you don't need a majority. Ultimately, you need a large contingency that can come together and with numbers to push. And you have it. It's just being put all over the place. And I got to be honest, the fact that it's under BLM is problematic because it hinders that. Like all of the problems that are taking place, many of these problems, like the Medicare for All stuff, the other stuff, that stuff dramatically affects the bottom portion of the population because that was a portion of the population that was not being underserved. And so taking this into the terms of race screws with that, right? It's just, I don't know. I don't know. I look at this stuff in the terms of how do you build a coalition? And to me, using race as a coalition or identity is problematic. Using class makes much more sense. How do you see that?
I think that this is always complicated because people say that if you focus on, traditionally from the left, if you focused on race, I've heard exactly what you're saying, that you should be focusing on class because you're able to build a broader coalition. But then if people focus on class and they exclude race, then a lot of people feel like they're, excluding the issue of race and they're sort of ignoring that. So just within that sort of conversation, then you can come in and criticize that. I could do that. I've got perspectives on that are critical of it, but I also see the weight of that. We've got to go into a break though. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back in a minute talking with Joel Siegel about the DNC, post-convention post-mortem on the DNC and the RNC now that both conventions are wrapped up. Again, we'll be back in a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Shooting from the lip. We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault lines.
And we're back, and you're listening to us, Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Siegel. We're talking with Joel Siegel, former congressional staffer and co-author of H.R. 676. That's the expanded and improved Medicare for All bill. It's also one of the leading architects for passage of the Affordable Care Act, a.k.a. Obamacare. And, by the way, co-founder and national director of the Justice Action Mobilization Network. That's JAM, J-A-M-N, a nationwide multiracial climate action network. Joel, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
I always love being on your show. I was just listening to the conversation that you were having before, and it was really important because the same conversation that you were having was the same conversation that I actually remember from the 1960s, where the Black Panthers were saying that if you want to deal with America's race problem, and you had to also deal with the class problem, and you have to deal with class and race. But I will say that unless we deal with leadership that's based on love, and as Mr. Connors used to say, love and logic, we're not going to evolve our country from a Jim Crow, 1% into what could be something quite beautiful, like closer to Canada or Europe, where I used to live. We can either transform or we can stay where we are. I'd rather transform into a beloved community that's more like Sweden or Switzerland, but we're not going to get there until we discuss leadership. We don't have trained leaders like Martin King. And I used to work with SNCC and SCLC and was taught by Abby Hoffman when I was the president of the progressive student movement in the 80s. But I hope that on your show, we have to talk about the need for training of new leaders that can bring people together, because Black and brown and progressive white, we're now in the majority. We're starting to find our voice because of the Black Lives Matter movement. But until the finger pointing and recriminations and people who are false leaders who have no training get out of leadership, we're not going to move this country forward. And I'll conclude by saying it's not about leaders. It's about the people who don't have food, who don't have housing, who don't have health care, who don't have a job, who live in neighborhoods, whether it's a barrio or a ghetto or Appalachia. We have to have new leaders that are motivated by love and not by anger. And anyway, I just wanted to say that.
I think that's an extremely good point. It really is, because I understand righteous indignation. There's a part where Martin Luther King was talking about basically somebody said something to him, and it came across to Martin Luther King where he was talking. He was like, "How dare this guy say this? I'm out here working and trying to, get it right." And he sat there and he realized that kid is living in squalor. And for all of my proclamations of we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we need to be motivated by love, that is not changing his situation. And it's this like honest, introspective moment of him recognizing, even James Baldwin, when he was arguing with with Malcolm X, he even made that notion. He said, look, I get that these people are angry. These kids are angry, the conditions and everything that they're in. And it makes it easy to fall into that notion of we need revolution. And Baldwin's point is, look, you're an American. Even if you went somewhere else, you'd still be an American. So I love that perspective. I mean, it basically bases politics in something that's real and genuine and valuable. Humanity itself. How do we change that? How do we get to that point where you said the leaders?
I think if you look at the Medicare for All movement, which was led by John Conyers and myself, Conyers was the protege of Martin King. So what happened was Martin King came to Detroit, invited by Rosa Parks. I'm writing Mr. Conyers' biography before he died. He and I had an agreement that I was going to write his biography. So I'm writing it right now. He won by 337 votes. So when I was with Conyers for 13 years, I was taught by Conyers, who was taught by King, and then all of King's, disciples, whether it was Walter Fauntleroy or Jesse Jackson. I was with these guys for 13 years. Andrew Young, I was just with him a few weeks ago. And what I noticed about all of them, they were ministers, they had PhDs. They were really guided by the teachings of Gandhi and Jesus Christ and, great spiritual traditions, but they were intellectual geniuses. And they were also very funny. They had a great sense of humor. But one thing I did notice, none of them had any ego, but they all were trained. They were all trained. The only way we were going to move forward, the Medicare for All movement was black, white. There needs to be a study of movements that were successful, and those people have to be interviewed, because what the left has to do is not make the mistake of the corporate press and sensationalize leaders who are kind of negative and don't know how to make change. I mean, the Medicare for All movement was one of the most radical movements in the history of our country, and I'm writing that book with along with that Conyers. You have to have everyone who led the Medicare for All movement. We were all disciples of Martin Luther King. King, the radical, has to be studied. King, the revolutionary, not just King who made the
But the Democratic Party breaks that up. Like they don't want to talk about King the socialist. They want to talk about King identity. You're right. Let me ask you something else, and maybe this is my own my own interest, but I do want to get to the convention. If 88% of the Democratic Party supports Medicare for All, nearly unanimous, 70% of the American public supports Medicare for All, how does any lefty, I don't care who that lefty is, I don't care what the network is, justifies voting for a party that doesn't represent the interests? And should not 30 million, 40 million lefties stand strong on that and say, you get our vote when you represent our interests, and post the demand? I mean, when we were talking about strikes and all that other stuff, that's basically what we were talking about here. Two political parties that have just said, we don't care what the American public needs. I've read all of the stats that were there. 30 million people out of a job, 12 million more people that lost their health care, tens of millions of people kicked out of their homes, 300 million people dead. That's a trauma. Those are like absolute traumas. And both political parties at both of these conventions did not care one iota. It was an afterthought. Now, how does lefties come to the conclusion of saying, yes, we need to back this? And doesn't that perpetuate the irrelevance of the left? If it does do that, shouldn't the correct policy be for the left right now to stand outside the political space and say, you get our vote when you represent our interests? And if you're willing to tank it, if you're willing to not appropriate that policy and tank it to a man you've called the apocalypse, then what does that say about our representative government in and of itself? Am I wrong in this? And I think you may have a different opinion on this, but that is the way I see it.
First of all, I love your passion. And I actually, the same righteous indignation you're expressing is what I have felt for the 40 years that I've been an activist. I am an activist who works in the Democratic Party. I'm a leftist who works within the Democratic Party. I'm a revolutionary who works in the Democratic Party. And there is probably one third of the Democratic caucus is now progressive. And I think the way the left is going to have to look at change is to say, all right, how far can we go to do what's right for the people? Housing for all, jobs for all. I'll just call it the Bernie Sanders agenda. Can we get there with 4 more years of Republican? No. They'll dismantle the Affordable Care Act. They'll kill us by making sure that we don't deal with climate change. They'll send more and more people out of the country. So we don't want a the Trump dictatorship, which is now both Stalin, Hitlerian, Mussolini, and Putin. They've got to go. This is the most dangerous time in our country's history. A Biden-Harris administration could get us closer to what we want. The reason why I'll never accept the system as it is because I've been a victim of the system. I have white privilege, but I owe $150,000 in medical bills. I was almost killed several times when I couldn't get surgeries, when I needed health care. That's why we launched the universal health care movement back in the day, how I got into Connor's office. But no, I think that we have to be able to, at the end of the day, say who is going to benefit from the policies of a particular administration. More people will benefit from a Biden-Harris administration than with a fascist, right-wing Trump Pence dictatorship. So what the left has to do, see, I don't even believe there is a left, but they get left out because of very, very poor leadership. There's not even a single-payer office in D.C. I've been trying to do that for 17 years. I'm the guy that wrote the bill. I'm the guy that founded the new movement, and we don't have an office in D.C. We don't have a united front. So the left has to have a conversation with itself. Number one, when will it unite? Number two, when will it get funded? Number three, when will it take over the Democratic Party? So as a revolutionary, my feeling is there's two parties. There's the Republican Party, which I can't stand, and there's the Democratic Party, which I can tolerate to a degree, but we have to take over the Democratic Party. And where the civil rights movement was very successful, and I've had these conversations with Walter Fauntleroy, they figured out how to take it over. And, the Tea Party took over the Republican Party. So here's the question I would ask both of you. Why in the hell can't progressives who are now in the majority take over the Democratic Party? And once again, I'll tell you why. Turf, ego, the nonprofit industrial complex, not fighting and caring about real people who need, like you said, housing, jobs, healthcare. They're caring too much about themselves and their organization's bank account. And when I meet these phony activists, I just sit there and I chuckle to myself and I say, they're not fighting for the people with a foot on their neck. They're fighting for their own ego. We need new leaders. We need leaders like both of you. My theory, we need young leaders, and I think we need young leaders of color. I'm getting ready to start a new, it's called the Beloved Community Training Institute. We're going to teach young people how to be leaders, teach them what we know, until young people become the leaders of this country, especially black women and black men and Hispanics. Nothing is going to change. My generation, forget about it. Forget about my generation. They have failed your generation. Your generation is going to have to lead, take over the Democratic Party, and restructure this country. And get the money out. The real question is, how do we get the money from the 1% to the 99%? How do we have a fairer, radical distribution of wealth? We cannot do that without a movement like SNCC or CLC. And it's very, like when I make these presentations in front of people, I never get a follow-up question. If I get interviewed on radio, you know what people don't ever say? Well, Joel, you've done this several times and other people have. How do you do it? Isn't that interesting? Never. It's always, oh, okay, that'll never happen. That means you're betraying the people.
Joel, thank you for joining us. I want to have you back on pretty soon. I'd love to have you back on pretty soon if you're game, if you're around. We can talk more about this issue of leadership. I also want to ask you, if you see the potential for something outside of the traditional two-party system, you're talking about building leaders. I just wonder if there might be something that can break that whole status quo, again, that dichotomy, that duopoly, however you want to see it. But Joel, thank you for joining us.
The Southern Christian leadership, the SCLC and the SBS, go back and study the movement about the car noise. And we're not a parliamentary system. We do need some kind of an organization that's like a third party. I think Progressive Democrats of America is the closest to it that I'm part of. But And without a party,
Joel, sorry, we've got to go. Let's talk about it more when if we can get you back on soon. Let's talk about it more. It was great. It was great having you. Thank you for joining us. For everybody listening, that was Joel Siegel, former congressional staffer, co-author of HR 676, also co-founder and national director of the Justice Action Mobilization Network. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're joined by Steve Malzberg, first-time guest press, airing on RT America Fridays at 6:30 p.m. Eastern and Sundays at 10:30 a.m. Eastern. Steve, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Good. My pleasure. Very exciting times and very troubling times at the same time.
It was the best and the most exciting of times, and the worst and the most troubling of times. That is 2020 for you, I suppose. We've just wrapped up the RNC after the DNC, of course. What's your take? Looking at both of these conventions, how do you think the parties did facing up against each other? Just looking at it on that level, if we can start there. What's your take, Steve?
Well, just the optics alone. If you want to talk about that, and of course the left is up in arms. How dare the president use the White House? Blah 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 blah. But I mean, just by the optics, it was like you had a rerun of an old boring movie before color came on the scene in black and white, and it has nothing to do with race. And then you had a Technicolor movie event, an epic motion picture. Just the I don't know how anybody sat through that didn't have to. I had to, and I love it either way because it's in me. But I don't know how anybody sat through that Democratic fiasco. Looked like an infomercial, a bad infomercial. And here you had an alternate convention. You didn't think of it as, oh, where's the crowd? You really didn't long for the crowd because everything was kept up and hyped up, and you were eager to see it. At least that's how I felt. And as far as content, I just thought there was absolutely no contest there either. You had a party in the Democrat Party that presented a very radical future under Joe Biden, although they tried not to. You could see it. It came through, shining through to me. And you had the Republicans pointing that out and telling the world who Donald Trump really is beyond the media rhetoric. And believe me, the media is full of anti-Trump rhetoric, what I do for a living. And I think the Republican convention was a great success, and I think you'll see kind of a bounce, a traditional convention bounce for Trump when the polls come out, something Joe Biden did not get in his convention.
Steve, I appreciate you coming on the show. I love that point of view, and I greatly disagree with it. Now, let me explain why. I agree with you that sitting through the Democratic thing was insufferable. I don't know how anybody did it either. And it was one platitude-laden speech after the next that basically had no policy in it. That's why it's weird to me to hear you say that he's talking about a radical future. Joe Biden didn't say anything in that speech. Joe Biden gave a short, if I'm not mistaken, one of the shortest speeches, and everybody else just attacked Trump. And it's like the world is on fire, at least from the context of the United States, tragedy one after the next. And they had nothing. Now, the Republican thing, it's interesting to me that you say that Democrats showed a radical future. What was the radical future that you believe Democrats was trying to present?
No, what I meant was if you listened to, first of all, Biden's speech, I mean, I still don't think he knows that he gave it. I think Trump's speech, by the way, started too late. They knew it was going to be over an hour, and that was too long. I think Ivanka should have shortened, or somebody should have shortened along the way, and Trump should have started more like a quarter after 10, not at 11:30, not at 10:30ish.
Wait. Do you think he did that in order to make a point about Biden's speech being short? Like the optics of it all? Like Biden can barely stand there and give a speech, and I can stand here for 70 minutes?
That's possible, but I would have loved to have seen it shorter, maybe 40 minutes, 45 minutes, with more passion and energy, and starting again earlier so that people that he needed to reach didn't turn off and didn't fall asleep, not because of the speech necessarily, but because it's bedtime. I just think it would have behooved them to start a little earlier. Having said that, what I meant by the radical vision, I don't know. Certainly Joe Biden didn't present it. Their goal was to kind of portray Joe Biden as, the old Joe Biden, what you would call a centrist Democrat, and go by that. I just mean the people that spoke, aside from Joe Biden, and what we know about them and who they are. And they presented Republicans, so-called Kasich and others, and AOC had a very, very, very short role, a minute long, and she endorsed Bernie. But I think underlying it all, you could see that they were just ignoring the average person, and they were trying to present people that they mostly care about, and that's the progressives in their party.
You think they care about progressives?
This is a very interesting thing. So I'm more of a centrist here in this show. I'm the independent guy. Jamarl comes. I sometimes lean left on issues, but then people criticize me for leaning right. I don't even know. Anyway, Jamarl's a lefty, backing Bernie originally. Anyway, we've had on a bunch of guests. We have a bunch of guests from the left, some guests from the right. A bunch of our guests on the left say that they see the Democrats moving further and further to the right. They see the Democrats as a sort of center-right party, and then the Republican Party as a far-right wing. They also see the Democrats as misrepresenting the voter base. Jamarl talks frequently about how 88% of people want Medicare for all, and how the Democrats apparently haven't done a good job pushing for that. It's just interesting to hear you coming from the exact opposite perspective. So I'd like to get your take. What do you see that you think we don't? Where do you think they're going further left that progressives might not see? What's your take on that issue, Steve?
With all due respect to whoever I'm offending, I don't mean to offend anybody personally. That's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. That the Democrats are moving to the right. This party, the party of JFK. Not only does the party of JFK not exist, and the party of Bill Clinton not exist, but the party of Barack Obama doesn't exist. They apologize for things they did in every one of those administrations, and you're saying the party is moving to the right? This is a party of that will not say boo to condemn or hold Antifa or Black Lives Matter to account for the violence. Or when their leaders come out in Chicago and say, hey, it's reparations, looting, go ahead, loot, that's great. They don't condemn it. They're scared to death. Moving to the right, that's what's going to win this election. COVID is one thing, and sure, it's a great concern. The numbers are coming down, however, and that's the biggest fear the Democrats have. But safety. You can't walk the streets. It doesn't matter if there's COVID or no COVID. If your kids can't go out without getting sucker punched by a gang and a mob. If you can't, besides the protest violence, now you've got Democrats all over in cities all over released prisoners to be humane, so they don't catch the virus. You got prisoners all over the streets. You got people getting shot left and right all over the cities, all over the country. These are Democratic mayors and Democratic police chiefs, Democrats running these cities. Moving to the right? Where are they moving to? Medicare for 80% want Medicare for all. Bull. No one wants to give up their private insurance if they have it through their employer. No one. Come on, that's why they mask it. That's why they hide it. You think Kamala Harris saying the Boston Marathon bombers should vote? Should vote? Is mainstream? Is moving to the right? I mean, I could give you a million examples with her. Please. You got to be kidding.
Steve, Steve, there's a difference between optics and actuality in regards to what they do in policy. And everything that you just said, for the most part, was just optics. I mean, this is the kind of dog and pony show. Did Obama really implement hope and change? What does that even mean, hope and change? No, he didn't. He gave 95% of their income gains to the top 1%. Do you honestly believe that a Joe Biden is going to go less than that? He's not. He's going to best that number. Do you honestly believe that the Democratic Party, yes, 88% of Democrats support Medicare for all? Look at the polling on it. 70%, 69 to be exact, of the public support it. The Democratic Party platform, Pelosi, Schumer, and Biden told all of them to kick rocks. And this is in the middle of a pandemic. And I got to be honest, the notion that people love their employer-based health insurance is ludicrous. 12 million people, just in the middle of the COVID-19 had lost their health care. Now, do they love it because that's the only thing available? Yeah, maybe. If something else was available where you can get rid of the bills, get rid of the expenses, deal with that stuff in taxes in a less regressive way, yes, they will love it. In the same way they love Social Security, and yeah, in the same way they love Medicare as it is right now. I don't know what you're looking at from the right that is giving you this notion that these guys are moving to the left. What I would tell you, and what I would even ask you, you tell me, you have a lefties who are basically the battered wife of the political spectrum. And I'm talking about lefty Democrats. And these guys are told you have nowhere else to go. And every last one of them bows their heads. Every last one of them. All of these networks that are right, you got to vote for Joe Biden. You got to vote for Joe Biden. Do they like him? No. 70% don't like him. And yet they're voting for him. Now you tell me, if you're the Democratic Party, do you cater to that group, or do you take that group for granted because you know that group is going to be there? Which is why they can have Republicans trotting across the stage. And lefties just stuck and watch. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. I understand the optics, but in real terms, what takes place is you have an irrelevant group, because that group always votes for the Democrat. And so the Democrat doesn't have to do anything from the standpoint of the left in that sense. Now, tell me where I'm wrong in that assessment.
Okay. Well, first of all, you say I don't know about the Democrats, 80%. But if you phrase the question differently, if you say Medicare for all, the public says, yeah. If you tell them, and polls have been done at the time it was proposed, if you tell them what it entails, that they'd have to give up their insurance, they don't want it as a nation. That's number one.
It depends.
Number two.
I mean, the polling changes. I agree with you. The polling does change, but fair enough.
Okay. Joe Biden is maybe the president in name, but every one of these radical leftists are going to hold a position of power in his administration. Joe Biden, with all due respect to him, is not the Joe Biden. You know, I have people who say they look in his eyes and they see their grandfather before he got sick. And I'm talking about. I don't need to go into it. It's pretty obvious. Joe Biden is the figurehead. Joe Biden will be there in name only. Every one of the candidates who dropped out were promised something. Every one of these left-wing radical leftists who are supporting Joe Biden, like you say, and it's true, have been promised something. His cabinet, AOC, will hold a prominent position. Women from the Squad, Stacey Washington. I'm talking about the radical left of the party will hold positions of power. Kamala Harris will hold a position of power. Joe Biden won't be running this country. He won't be running the party. That's the scary part. That's what the Republicans have also, Donald Trump specifically, has pointed out over and over. And if there are debates, and I doubt it, you got Nancy Pelosi's adding, don't debate, because Donald Trump will lie. Oh, yeah, great. Well, the media...
No, I agree with you on that one, Steve. Steve, I agree with you on that one. I have to interrupt because we're going to have to close it out. I agree with you to Nancy Pelosi. I did a video the other day saying this is the difference between patriots and fascists, and the idea that you're going to say, I'm not going to debate the guy because you know that he's going to get eaten alive in that debate. That's problematic to me for that person being in that position. So yeah, I agree with you on that part. But Steve, love your energy and I love this conversation. We got to invite you back to see whether or not you're right or whether I'm right. I think the left is going to get marginalized and the AOC is not going to get any cabinet position at all. But we will see. Thank you for coming on, man. Steve Manzenberg, a veteran political commentator and host of Eat the Press, airing on RT America Fridays at 6:30 p.m. Eastern and Sunday at 10:30 Eastern. We will be right back in a moment. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're taking calls, 202-521-1320. This should be a fun segment. Like those last 2, great conversations there with Joel Siegel and Steve Maltzberg. 2 very different views on the DNC and the RNC, on the face-off between the parties and on the state of America. Yeah, we're taking calls, 202-521-1320. Please do feel free to call in. We should get him back on soon, man. That was a good fault line. That was one of those.
Both of those were fun.
It was great. It was great
Both
to hear
of
that
those
back
were
and
fun.
forth.
Yeah, I mean, like, to get a lefty and a right winger and to be able to argue with both, right? Because I disagree with Siegel in regards to action, even though I agree with him from the standpoint of lefties. But I think what he misses is that lefties are taught to be passive. Like, it goes in 2 ways. Internally, in your head, you think, oh my God, I can't let the world fall off a cliff. Good. Your opposition doesn't think that way, because your opposition is not entirely harmed by the world falling off of a cliff. So to some degree, you're always, if you're going to hold that point of view, will be at a loss. If you believe that it is your responsibility to get Donald Trump or to get Joe Biden elected, then you have already failed, because it is not your responsibility. It is Biden's responsibility to get your vote. And that inversion is the difference in our politics and the reason why those RNC and DNC conventions can be the way they are. Because people are stuck with this 2-party system, and if you're black, if you're Hispanic, if you're poor, you may look at the Democrats as your saviors to hold back the night because Republicans are maniacs. By the same token, they know that we can take all of this cash and we can just do, little stuff. Because basically, they have nowhere else to go. There's nobody else that's going to take them on in that sense, which is why I make the point that you don't have a representative government at that point, because the incentives that are built into the way that we interact in our political system has it inverted. And so instead of people holding their politicians accountable, it's people looking to their politicians just to save them from the night of whoever that candidate is. That needs to change. That's why I make my argument in that way. And so talking to Siegel, I really wanted him to answer that and basically justify. And his justification, which I get, and I think I would get that from pretty much any Democrat that I talk to, even if they were a lefty, is basically, look, we have to save the world from falling off an axis with Trump. And you can look at that in 2 ways. Yes, that's one way of viewing it, but the other way of viewing it is also, no, it is not my responsibility to save the world falling off his axis. It is Joe Biden's responsibility to get my vote. I am standing on a policy where 88% of Democrats support. That means that between the 2 of us, how do you not appropriate this under the context of where we are now? And I find it to be like astonishing that a lefty would take the position of the Democrats will never do that. But think about what that means. 88% support, 70% of Americans support. Even if you ask them, say, okay, what about this? What about this? What about this? You still get a policy that people would love every bit as much as Social Security. And yet, it never comes up. Like, I find it to be, and I use that as an example only because of the level of support, but you can go to multiple policies. I mean, Social Security expansion or whatever, and none of those things are in the queue. So yeah, we have callers. Black Sheep from Texas. How's it going, man?
Good, Jamal. Good to hear from you, bro.
So what's on the agenda for today? Can you hear me?
Yeah, so I want to, yes, sir. I want to wrestle with this idea, man. I do not think that Joe Biden, if all things are equal, or even Hillary would have, I don't think if Hillary would have won the election and COVID hit, I don't think she would have done any too much of a better job than Trump. And my argument for this is, you ready? There were anti-vaxxers before Trump. There were flat earthers before Trump. There would be anti-mask people with Trump or without Trump, in my opinion. And on top of that, pretty much that's mostly. And also, Hillary would have given away most of the games to the top, to the rich anyway, just like Trump did. So I don't think there would have been meaningful difference either way on the handling of COVID in America. And
really,
just wanted you to wrestle with that idea. Personally, I don't think so.
Really? So I disagree with you on that.
For the call. Interesting perspective. We are taking more calls, by the way. 202-521-1320. I just want to come back on that real quick. I think you're right. I think at the very least, I think a lot of people think you're right. I don't know how things would have gone. I could see Hillary, Hillary specifically having bungled this too. I could see anybody having bungled it. There are people who are looking at America, seeing deep structural problems that instead of any one decision, the fiat of the government decision of Donald Trump, it was just America itself as a country that was going to have these problems. So I've heard people make those arguments. Regardless, I think a lot of people think that, and I think that there's this big, like in 2016, I think there's this preference falsification thing going on, where a lot of people's voices are not being represented, and they don't feel comfortable expressing their opinions, for better and for worse, whether their opinions are good or bad. And therefore, what you're going to see is the result of this dark matter in the form of probably Trump getting reelected. You're not going to see the perspectives themselves, but you're going to see the results.
Okay, that's interesting. Because I would have thought, to me, whether it was Hillary or whoever else, if it was a Democrat, they would have just had it as a technocratic issue. And so in their heads, you just put on masks. Or you do. The catch becomes, how does the owner class deal with Democrats in order to... I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I there's going to be loss of life anyway. But the catch becomes, does Hillary say, look, we're going to use the Defense Production Act to ensure that these masks and these PPEs and all of this other stuff that we need are produced.
It's all sliding door universes,
Yeah,
it's
hard to know.
Prognosticate on that, and I see it as after the fact. Yeah.
No, I agree with you, man. I totally
We're taking
agree.
calls. 202-521-1320. We are taking calls. 202-521-1320. Talking about on the right and the left. I want to come back to the Steve Malzberg interview for just a second. You said that you guys disagree on a lot. It's funny. This might be the horseshoe theory or something like that coming into play. But what you guys do agree on is your criticism of the Democratic Party. You don't agree on the criticism of the Republican Party. It's interesting that this is asymmetrical. You don't agree. Maybe if you were a sort of establishment Democrat and we have a dissident right-winger on, I don't know exactly what that would look like, but especially because Trump's gotten elected. But if we did, I could see it being reversed. But it's just interesting that you guys agree on criticizing the Democratic Party, the establishment as a whole.
I don't have a bias.
I think that's revelatory in this election cycle.
Well, I don't have a bias in this. I mean, I don't have a dog in the hunt. My dog in the hunt is policy. That's all. If you ask me, if you ask Joe Biden, hey, what are you going to do, Joe Biden, for the office? He'll give you just a long speech. You know what I mean? And it's like, all right, I have no idea what took place. Now, if you ask me, I will give you a list of policy. That's what I represent. And because that's specific. If anything else is dodgy and fudgy, and I can't necessarily know that the person is really doing what they said they're going to do. So to me, the thing that I try to nail down is this is what I want in regards to policy. Now, you can go less than that, and there are things I'm willing to negotiate away. So I'm not like a purist in regards to all of these things must be. I'm gettable. You got me show me some leg, but I'm gettable. But that's not what takes place. So it's a funny conversation. I love that conversation, believe it or not, because it's like, we agree on the Democratic stuff, but we start to or diverge when you get to this notion of how Democrats view elements of their own party. And then the catch becomes, is he being earnest with me because he is a political commentator? Or does he earnestly believe, just because of where he is disposed on the political spectrum, that no, AOC really runs the party? Like if he can, God,
I think he believes that. I think he's genuine in that belief. We can come back to that. We're taking calls. I want to hear your take. 202-521-1320. We've got Ralph calling in from New York. Ralph, you're on the line. What's your take?
Hey guys, how you doing? I have a really simple question. If I don't want to vote for Biden-Harris, and we have 2 months coming up to the election to try to get ourselves organized, who can we vote for?
That's a good question. Oh, you're asking me?
Trump
thank
or
you
Jesse
for the
Ventura.
I'm sorry.
Right in. I mean, but yeah, no, we're taking calls 202-521-1320. But I would say, there's Trump, there's somebody like Jesse Ventura, a write-in, or there's one of, if you have a personal third party that you'd like to go for, just for sort of moral support at this point, go for it. But I think the more pressing question isn't who else should you vote for, or which protests should you attend, which side of these protests you should attend. It's like, what are my personal interests and abilities, and what kind of organization can I build that can affect change? If you care about it, again, you live your life. I don't mean to put too much on you. And who am I to talk? I'm just a radio show host. I don't have some big apparatus of my own. But my point is, I think that's the real underestimated, undervalued course of actions here, is start getting involved in creating your own organizations and either leading people or being led yourself to do stuff. If you have more of those, like Joel Siegel was talking about leadership earlier, I think that's where it's at. But again, we're taking calls 202-521-1320. You can call. Give us your take. We've got time for probably one or two more before we go to the end of the hour. I don't know, Jamarl, who would you recommend you vote for?
Well, so our producer said Gloria La Riva is running in a socialist party. Look, my problem is this. Every time you automatically give your vote to someone, they're not trying to get it, you give it. Every time you feel like you're stuck, every time like you feel like, I know this guy's not representing my interests, but I'm going to vote for him anyway because the other guy's a monster, you legitimize it. And so do I want to continuously legitimize a system that after this one, the very next election is going to be the same? And the very next election is going to be the same, just like the ones going back 40 years. And so I'm stuck with this notion of legitimacy. And should you put energy into something that's going to behave in those terms? I can't stand Trump. And the fact of the matter is, if Donald Trump wins, most likely he's going to take the House, the Senate, and probably put 2 more Supreme Court seats in addition to holding the presidency. That's a checkmate in real terms. By the same token, who's to blame? If you had another party that was running with the earnest intention of the public itself, then this would not be a factor. This would not be an issue. Just like, do you realize that Democrats had the House of Representatives for like 40, 50 years? They didn't think the Republican even win the House. And what happened? You get to the 80s, you get to these kind of neoliberal policies, and that stuff starts to bleed off, and they eventually lose it. I'm making the point that the party is to blame. Your party has just slid so far to the right, where it's the relative distance between the two has just gotten people to the point where they just left. And those were Democratic voters. So don't look at me and ask me this. I suppose you can. But the larger question, and even Siegel, you have a policy that has so much support in the middle of a pandemic, and you can't get these guys to back it. That's sad. That's all. That's utterly sad. Let's go to a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines, coming to you live from the divided states of America on the West Coast and in the politically independent corner. I am your investigative political analyst and radio show host, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Nothing like mispronouncing your own last name while you're going out. That is truly one for the books. All right.
It happens, man. It happens.
We do these every morning. It does. 7, 8, and 9 a.m. Eastern. Let's get straight into them. President Trump spoke from the White House front lawn last night, accepting the Republican nomination for the presidency. This ended the RNC. Last night was the last night of the RNC. In a more than 70-minute speech, Trump focused on American greatness and end to the coronavirus and reducing violence in the streets, also attacking Biden and the Democratic Party for giving shelter to radical leftists, as he put it. Protesters protested outside the White House with confrontations between protesters and police there. Senator Rand Paul said he had to be escorted to safety by police through a crowd of angry protesters while attending the event at the White House. Our next headline, 25% of Louisiana is without power after Hurricane Laura wrecked the city of Lake Charles and the strip of land to its south. 6 deaths have been confirmed. That was as of last night. There have been more than 800,000 power outages in that state, more than 220,000 residents currently dealing with the effects of 67 water system outages. President Trump said he will be visiting Louisiana following the effects of Hurricane Laura. He'll be there to address recovery, likely this weekend, likely as soon as tomorrow or Sunday. The teen who was involved in the Kenosha shooting, who was responsible for the shooting, Kyle Rittenhouse, has been charged with 6 criminal counts. First was first-degree intentional homicide. That came on Wednesday. Then yesterday, on Thursday, he was charged with 1 count of reckless homicide, a count for an attempted intentional homicide, 2 counts of recklessly endangering safety, and possession of a dangerous weapon while under the age of 18. That's a misdemeanor penalty there. Rittenhouse is currently in the custody of the Lake County Judicial System in Illinois, awaiting extradition to Wisconsin. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will step down from his leadership of the country, citing health problems, specifically the consequences of chronic ulcerative colitis. Abe has been Prime Minister of Japan since the end of 2012. And one last headline here. This was a sort of lingering story. The Washington Redskins. There was this sort of story that was supposed to break. We didn't know what it was. This was weeks ago at this point, maybe over a month ago. This was a while back in any event. And it's broken. It seems like over a decade ago, there was a photo shoot with models, scantily clad models, and then they didn't know it. Unbeknownst to them, there was a sort of private video shoot going on where they were not just scantily clad, they were fully exposed, and that video exposed them. And again, this was private. It was privately circulated within the Redskins management. So that's what's coming out, and that is a big deal. It's a couple of years after Me Too, so I'm not sure how sharply that is going to strike the public's attention at this point, but big deal. Washington football team, Redskins. My producer's correcting me. Did I mess that up? I thought I said football team. Anyway, those are the headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, and we're back into it. Oh, you're right. That's what he's saying. Formerly known as the Redskins, Washington's football team, the football team formerly known as the Redskins. Yeah, that's true. That's a fair criticism. Anyway, we are also taking calls again now. By the way, we've got a pre-record we're coming up on in about 25 minutes. We're going to be talking with Susie Wiles, sort of mixing with time there. We will be talking during this pre-recorded interview that we recorded previously. Anyway, it'll be an interview about New Zealand, their coronavirus response. Stay tuned for that if you'd like. But we're taking calls now, 202-521-1320. Again, 202-521-1320. I just see this coming in. Engineer Andre, I did want to call myself a Sasquatch when I got my name wrong at the beginning of the thing. I think just because I look like one. My beard is kind of ebbing, waxing and waning, ebbing and flowing. My beard keeps getting longer and shorter as I shave it. That's just how these things go. But right now it is definitely in the Sasquatch phase. So there was probably
I just kept saying we got to get a better picture of you.
I know.
Yeah, I just said, yeah.
You can't help but wonder why it hasn't come. Well, that's why. I can't deal with this beard, man. Here's what it is I don't want to shave it all off because I kind of like having it, but I'm also like not an experienced beard trimmer. I've only ever grown it out like, half an inch or whatever. And when I've grown it out longer than that, I've just taken it down without having to maintain it. So I've gotten into this whole thing. I don't know if you've ever gotten into this stuff, like beard oil.
Absolutely.
I bought beard oil. This sounds pretty
so
bougie. I know,
didn't get beard oil.
Getting into the self-care thing.
No, I didn't get beard oil. What I did do though is what happens is I don't. I stopped going to the barbershop and I just end up buying clippers. And so I let it get out and then just cut it all the way down. My wife was like, "Oh God, you have to tell me when you do that. You look like a different person." And so I understand what you mean. It's like it grows out. After all, you don't have to be at work. You don't have to, For me, I have to look presentable just for the thing. But you just shave it off and grows back. Shave it off. There was a guy I can't think of his name.
Here's the thing. I want to make it look presentable with the beard. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to pick up the skills to take care of that stuff. Anyway, we're taking calls. 202-521-1320 is the number you can call us right now. 202-521-1320. We've got Rod calling in. Rod from Philadelphia. Rod, what's going on?
Hey, what's going on, guys? I wanted to talk about something that's been going on since May 25th, since George Floyd's death. We had for about a hot minute, which was protests, which at the time was rightfully so. But I mean, let's say about 2 hours after these peaceful protests, to present day, we have these rioting, we have this violence, right. And you saw at the when the RNC let out, you see all these people. I mean, a lot of older people walking back to their hotels or their vehicles. We saw Rand Paul get attacked again. This is the third time. a senator of the United States has been attacked, and his wife was attacked. And what is Mayor Bowser talking about? It's like it didn't even happen. She is the commissioner of police. Every city, whether it's New York, that's de Blasio, whether it's Philadelphia, that's Mayor Kenny, the clown, they are the commissioners. These people are in charge, but they keep allowing violence to go. And they've already told us since the coronavirus came, because it's not the virus that has us in our situation, it's the political decisions.
Right, answer me something for a moment. Right, I'm sorry to interrupt. Answer me something. Why do you think they're angry and keep coming out like that? Because you would agree with me, I think, that most people don't want to do that. Like, under normal circumstances, it takes a ton of energy. You said no? What am I missing?
No.
I'm just asking you.
I agree with you. Okay. Most people don't want to. What you're seeing is you're seeing a lot of younger people. Those people are old. Most of them, look at the crowd. They're 30 and under. They're not. Let's just use in your 40s. I'm in my 30s. They're not in that generation where you think, like, why would you go out every night to try to hurt people, burn down things? These are younger people that have been socially engineered. They live in social media. They live, breathe, and die. You take away their Instagram, their Facebook, their Snapchat, their Twitter, they would probably have a psychotic episode. This is where they...
No, but I'm asking you something very specific. Wait, hold on. I'm asking you something very specific. Why do you think that if you agree with me that they would rather be playing Xbox, they would rather be, having sex with their wives or girlfriends or mountain climbing or whatever else, something else. If that's true, then why are they using their energies, their muscles, their momentum to go out and protest? Not all of them are violent, by the way. I'm just making the point that why are they doing it? Do you don't think that there's something endemic in their society that is leaking into them that is provoking this? Like, you honestly think that this is just for nothing, just for giggles or so? And by the way, I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm not even using those terms. I'm just saying, do you not see that there's something mechanical in your society that is greatly affecting that group? Let me ask you this. Why did they overwhelmingly go to Sanders as opposed to the other candidates?
So to answer your question, let's just take yesterday for example, just because that's the most recent thing. Washington, D.C. is a very affluent city. It's very expensive to live in. So you're talking about these people are the center of privilege. That you have majority, whether it be Portland, whether it be Seattle. You have, in the name of black people, you have these white liberals, Marxists, who are in the name of black. They say they are fighting. So they're already telling you what they're doing. They are fighting, not in the sense of I'm out here protesting or, camping out in front of this politician's house just so they can hear me. No. They're starting fires. They're starting violence. They're literally telling you what they are doing. You don't see black, brown, or Asian, or people who like, hey, you don't see that. You're seeing a very specific group of people.
I guess the point that I'm trying to make to you is that those people who are out there for Sanders and said, are you willing to fight for somebody in the way that you would fight for yourself? In it, like built into it. If you agree with me also that these people, many of them are young, whether they're white, black, gay, straight, anywhere in between, and I agree with you, in Portland, many of them are white. But in D.C., and whether you're talking about in Portland or some of these other countries, in some of these other areas, the D.C. protests specifically, people had to bust themselves in. D.C. is not affluent. If you're looking at anything around D.C., it is a ghetto. Now, I'm making the point that some of these people are being bussed in. Some of these people are coming from elsewhere. They are protesting. They are angry. They have student debt, $50,000. They're living with their parents. They may have to deal with their parents' health insurance. The older generation is dominant in regards to the stock market, and that seems to be the thing that's paid attention to. Their future, from the standpoint of jobs, is scarce. I'm making the point to you that they are out there because of deficits and policy. And I understand that people like to look at...
I think that Rod and a lot of other people, I think that folks look at a lot of the protesters, specifically the ones who are getting violent, and they can hear what you're saying, but they don't see what they're doing as a justified response. And they don't see it as anything approaching justified. They see it as
No. I'm not saying,
opposite of justified.
Look, justification is not... justification is one of those things that depending upon your...
You're doing? Again, you were talking about...
No, I'm not justifying.
Pardon me, we were talking about Tucker. We're talking about Tucker Carlson. You're talking about Tucker, whether Tucker was justifying Kyle Rittenhouse coming by saying that there was this sort of mechanical, you should have predicted it. Isn't that what you're saying? I don't think
that a child...
say you aren't.
But I'm not. Basically the argument that Tucker Carlson was making, that it was foreseeable that a child soldier was going to go and shoot somebody. I'm making the point that if you have people who are living in squalor and you take away their idea of the world, but it's true. Why do you think those people were backing Sanders and those policies for nothing? No, they were backing it because they needed those things. They were desperate for those things. And now you've removed that from the table.
It's not about the policies. It's about the protests.
It is about the policies. It's about the policies. No, it's about the policies. Because what you and what a lot of people do is eliminate the precursor from what's taking place now. You can't. It is strictly linked. I don't have to justify anything. I don't have to take a position on anything. Whatever I feel about it is irrelevant. It happens because of the precursors. Okay. That's the point I'm trying to tell you. I don't know how you eliminate that part. I don't know how. And I hate the fact that these people feel the need to go out there and do this. But it doesn't matter what I think.
All right. I think we should... You know what? I'm having a hard... Wait, let's go to a break real quick. We're still taking a bunch of calls, but there's a sort of a bunch of... Anyway,
there's a lag.
I'm having a hard time telling exactly how many callers we have or who the callers are. We'll get that figured out in just a second. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Catch all the breaking global, political, and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. And there have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially.
Peter Sunday, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
Increased activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usual flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that putting in a pipeline dispute that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're taking calls, 202-521-1320. You can call us to talk about anything we're talking about, anything in the news, politics, that kind of thing, as well as quirky, universal issues of your taste. President Trump, speaking from the White House, RNC stuff, we could call about that. We could talk about the DNC. We could talk about Louisiana and Hurricane Laura. Or you could express sympathy for Shinzo Abe, which, frankly, I'm sad to have not heard more of. I have had a stomach ache. I know the troubles of chronic ulcerative colitis. Now, that's a reprehensible opinion. Anyway, we're taking calls. 202-521-1320 is the number. I think Manuel in D.C., you're on the line. What's going on?
Hey, boss. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing? What's on your mind, man?
Pretty good. So just wondering where your take is regarding Alex Jones. Do you know who Alex Jones is, InfoWar?
Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've met him before.
So
did you? You met Alex Jones?
I've been listening to. Yeah, I've listened to him for the last.
No, but please, Manuel. Yeah, no, go for it.
Yeah, 20 years. InfoWars. It's an information war. Basically, what we're dealing with is information war. What right information do you have in your brain cells to decide the next step? Most people are pissed off because they're listening to the media. So what do you think about InfoWars' take on all of this? Let's get down to the really, let's not be afraid, scared of all the bad people and just talk about it. What's going on to the United States of America? People are pissed off. There's lots of things going on, fake virus or real. What do you think about Alex Jones? I'm sure you guys know what he thinks about the whole nine. Just tell us.
Thank you, Manuel. I appreciate the call.
I think Alex Jones is hilarious. I think some people think he's dangerous. I don't think he's that dangerous. I disagree with a lot of the stuff he says, and some of his beliefs, some of the stuff he says. Disagree with some of the more conspiratorial stuff, quote unquote. But also, he's an itinerant, long-term journalist, somebody who's gone from topic to topic over the years, pretty consistently doing his work. Early coverage of Waco, early coverage of the Bohemian Grove, early coverage of just like interesting sort of dissident topics in modern American politics and recent history. So I like him on that end. With InfoWars and with this idea of an information war, I have friends. I have a couple of close friends and associates, and plenty of people. You can see plenty of people in society who think very much in that mindset, who look at things as a war between different actors on this battlefield. I see the legitimacy of it, but I just see it's like there might be a war happening, but that's happening within this wider space where ultimately nobody is in charge, where the reason there's a war is that nobody knows what they're doing. And I prefer to look at it on that level, which means that instead of pitting myself against somebody who's trying to deceive me, which happens all the damn time, I try to look at what's true and try to look at what they're getting wrong and where they're being misled by their own false beliefs, of which I think there are many. Anyway, that was a bunch of talking. I didn't mean to ramble. What's your take on that issue, Jamarl?
Alex Jones, I consider look, I've watched plenty of Alex Jones stuff. It is funny, and I think it shouldn't be taken beyond that. I think he's an actor, per se, playing a part. I think Alex Jones does his job extraordinarily well for what he does, meaning this ability to like hold an audience and be entertaining and everything else. However, what he says is just out there, and I have a hard time. I'm usually more freaked out by the people who are watching him because I actually think he's an actor, if that makes sense. Like, I think it's a shtick. I don't think it's a real thing. And so from that lens, that's the way I look at him. It's like, wow, he can hold an audience. He can hold a show. It's not easy to get on a show and hold a space for like a 30 minutes or 40 minutes where you're just kind of talking and doing a monologue. And he does it all the time. So, yeah.
Might be a trickster. But I think he plays the role of the trickster pretty well, where he does take up a serious position. Like I think he has some of his own convictions, but at the same time, he's doing. I think, he mocks himself. If you've seen him, I've seen a couple of interviews. He has an interview with Joe Rogan that was pretty widely watched a while back. I think that's still up there on YouTube. It's just interesting. And I think you can get a sense more of him than on that interview than I've seen anywhere else. It's interesting. I think he has some deeply held convictions, but at the same time, I think he kind of makes fun of himself. I'll be honest, broadly, I have positive feelings. I think the whole Sandy Hook thing, which has been used against him, was overdone. I think he got some stuff wrong and then retracted it and then was forever demonized for that. I think he was too incautious, but that's just the name of his game. So anyway, we've got other callers. We should go to them, I think. Brave calling in from Atlanta. Brave, you're on. What's going on?
Hey, what's going on, guys? Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah, absolutely. What's on your mind?
Cool, man. I want to present a weird analogy. Just I don't mean to ramble, but just go with me for as much time as I can have. When I'm a comic book collector, I like Marvel movies and stuff like that. Whenever they get ready to make a movie and the idea going into pre-production of do we need to make this? We need to take this comic book material and make it more serious, or do we embrace it for what it is? Right, and which will present itself better on the screen, and I point to that, and then I look at things in society and how society's going now, and I see like slim parallels. Maybe it's just the way my mind works. I don't know, but I've taken a lot of media. I've taken a lot of media and a lot of information, and what I see that seems to be the common thread is in every case, we keep asking, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And why is it that no one is recognizing that this is happening? What if it's not a matter of people not recognizing that it's happening? What if we're spending so much time asking why it's happening that we're missing the fact that this is all purposeful? Because I think we give them the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, they're just stupid. They just don't know how to do the job, and that's why they messed up the coronavirus response so poorly. But at the same time, I think we can all facilitate the idea that if, like the last caller that called in, if Hillary Clinton had won, would it be any different? Maybe it might look a little different, but would the outcome be any different? And if I ask myself that question, I have to say I don't think it would be any different. I think that they're doing nothing, and they're doing nothing on purpose. And I think that the people are sitting here wondering why and looking for someone to save us and asking, well, why do they keep killing us? Why do they keep killing us? And we keep asking why, and instead of actually acting because we refuse to recognize the flat fact that it's in front of us that this stuff is being done on purpose. I can come to no other conclusion than that, because you go to the best schools, you have the best life, and you can't come to the common sense rationale that, hey, we got to make sure people have money if we're shutting down the government. We have to make sure people have health care if we have a pandemic that's killing everyone. These things are common sense. I don't care what kind of bubble you're in. So and then if I look on the other side of that coin, I know that power wants to continue its power. You know what I'm saying? So if those things are all true, let's just say those things are all true, then why would I sit here and continue to say, oh, this is just a bunch of people who don't know what they're doing, and just hope that someone's going to come and save us, some politician is going to come and save us? Like, I don't understand why we're not putting together those dots. And maybe it's just the way that I think. I don't know. But they always say, if a person shows you who they are, accept them for who they are, right? Well, our government is showing us clearly that they don't care. They don't care. And our media is showing us that we're going to lie to you. And they're showing it to us blatantly. And I would go so far as to say maybe we might want to start entertaining the idea this could be a war against us. Because when I was a contractor, I remember I had a contract with DISA. I worked for DISA, which is Defense Information Agency, and we were expanding their network servers. And we were putting in the Google search during the time when the whole Snowden thing went down, and with a big concern about them tracking our information. We were expanding their server rooms and everything like that, so they could process this information and send it on to. And I don't want to get too far into that, but at that time they were farming information on us. They were turning from outward to inward. So why would we not consider the fact that there is some form of war or hostile activity going on against the actual people?
Brave, I want to thank you for the call. We've got two other callers, and I wanted to respond real quick because I think you were kind of mostly responding to me because I was the one who was talking about war in response to Manuel's comment just now. Anyway, I don't want to take over, but I think that's I think that's appropriate. My brief thing here, because we've got a few other callers. I do see some work going on. That's not my ultimate high-level perspective, but another way of looking at this is, if there's a work going on, if there are people who are combating you and they're trying to kill you, it either literally or they're just trying to sort of extract wealth from you, which certainly happens to some extent. My question is, who are you talking about on the higher levels? Because everywhere I look, what I see is, for the most part, in terms of the culpable parties, weakness. I see institutional decay. I see people making not fumbling decisions to help us, but fumbling decisions to make themselves. I see them falling apart. The problem is I see the system falling apart with them. That's my take. And so therefore, ultimately, I'm opposed to them and have been for as long as I've been conscious, as far as I can remember. It's always been this like undercore of my thinking, trying to like be a dissident in some way on these higher levels. But anyway, that's why I do it. Jamarl, any take before we go to more calls?
I don't I don't think so. I enjoyed the call because I think he hits on something that there are a class of people, for whatever reason, don't see. And I know what it is. It's the point that I made earlier, the jarring difference where you could see this kind of crack in the door because of a rational action versus the irrationality of the system itself in regards to how you think somebody will rationally behave in doing their things. So yeah, I think that's where he's getting at. And how can I disagree with him? I mean, whether it's a war, whether it's an attempt at advantage. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Timing was off. Another real quick thing. Again, going to calls. It's just, let's just go straight to calls. Let's do it. We've got Joe calling in from Virginia. Joe, you're on the line. What's going on?
Hey, guys. I think that people that have ears to hear and eyes to see recognize right now that we are at the edge of a cliff. Just this week, we have private citizens shooting other private citizens in the street. It's happening every day, but it usually happens in the cities where people don't notice it. But at the height of a political apex, we have individuals going in the street with rifles, illegally taking them there because they don't know what else is going on. And I'm not saying that Tucker is right. I am personally nonviolent. I don't own firearms. I'm a pacifist. But I'm looking at the world in front of us and realizing that shots in Kenosha might be our Fort Sumter. People are shooting each other in the street, and I don't see it slowing down, sadly.
I think you're right. Yeah, if there's a war afoot, that's the kind of that's a level of the war that we're talking about. And you're right; it's gotten to that point. It has gotten that violent. It has gotten literally people dying. It's getting worse. Agree. And I don't see anything slowing it down. Go for it.
And it's a spiral, because the way I processed it, I look at it this way: you have a society. That society is constructed in a particular way. If you have people who are disadvantaged in that society, that is going to be a pressure cooker. Whether it's social, whether it's economic, whether it's justice, whatever that is, those things are going to eat and dig into those individuals. And even if they don't express it in a political sense, they're expressing it somehow. And something happens. It sets a spark. They react. And the comfortable people don't see it because they only see the reaction. They don't necessarily pay attention to the fact of the pressure cooker, the scenario. I have 32% of people who are unemployed in Kenosha that were black. I mean, that's astonishing. What do you say? Idle hands is the devil's workshop? I guess my basic point is now that has a riot. And that riot is visited upon innocent people. Indiscriminate. Every bit as much as indiscriminate as it was on the people prior. And some people say, I need to defend myself. One party says the social contract is broken down. And it doesn't defend me and protect me. So anytime something happens, there's going to be reaction. Zero tolerance. Tit for tat. That tat is hitting people who have nothing to do with it. And so those people who have nothing to do with it say we're going to defend ourselves. And you have right-wingers with guns come to these places. And then you have a situation where other people who were there in protest.
We've got one more caller before we go into this
pre-record. Oh, let's get to the caller. Let's get to the caller. I'm sorry for
interrupting.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, you're fine. Let's
20 seconds. John in Maryland, you're on. What's going on?
Yeah, I think it's very important that the governor of Wisconsin, Evers, we need to separate the good protesters and the people who are doing the looting and the rioting.
John, I'm sorry. I cannot make out what you're saying. I'm going to ask you, this is our last show and we're not taking any more calls today. I mean, this is our last show of the week. Please call in on Monday. If you're still around, please call in on Monday. We're going into a break. We'll be back in a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Tune in every Friday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for a weekly segment of the worst mainstream media headlines of the week. They tell us what's behind the worst, most misleading, and funniest headlines from around the news with Steve Patt of the blog Left Eye on the News. Together, they pull apart the corporate media's bias, spin, and downright lies. Tune in this Friday and every Friday for the worst and most misleading headlines of the week.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with my co-host Shane Stranahan. We have a pre-recorded interview with Susie Wiles. Susie Wiles is associate professor, is a microbiologist, a microbiologist at the University of Auckland, New Zealand, in the areas of molecular medicine and pathology. She studied medical microbiology at the University of Edinburgh, followed by a PhD in microbiology at the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology in Oxford. This was a really interesting interview, and she's basically giving us an overview of how New Zealand handled COVID. So let's go to the pre-recorded interview. You can hear it right now.
Great to have you. Thank you for joining us, Susie. So after 100 days, New Zealand finally had a resurgence of COVID. After, I think it was 102 days without a single new outbreak. This was actually, I remember the timing of this, when you were last on the show, we interviewed you and you hadn't had cases in quite a while. And then between the time that we had interviewed you and we were going to be playing it, you had new cases. And then very recently we were going through the process of booking you. And now we've actually, we've had the new cases after we've scheduled the interview, so we know that this has happened. But there was almost an encore. What happened this time? Obviously your response to COVID has been dramatically more effective than the United States as well as many other nations around the world. So not slighting you in the slightest, but what's happened since then, and how's your response changed in the last couple of weeks dealing with this new outbreak?
Yeah, so I guess so we're following this elimination strategy, which means that we aim to get down to zero community transmission in New Zealand. But we obviously have New Zealanders still returning from overseas. So we also have very strict border controls where it's only New Zealanders at the moment. And there are you can apply for some exemptions, like if you're in a particular job that's needed or something like that. And then people come into the country and they go into a managed 14-day isolation. And so we've been trying to, intercept cases at the border. But it's always been very clear that, those protocols that are in place are not ever going to be 100%, bulletproof, right? So I guess it's been a kind of waiting to see what would happen, when would cases emerge again. And that's what happened. So at 102 days, we got notification that somebody had gone to their GP, their doctor, with symptoms, and they were basically tested. It was found to be COVID-19. And so then the machine kind of started with contact tracing happened, massive ramp up of testing. So one of the things that we'd become quite complacent about is testing of people with symptoms. So, most people who had kind of sniffles, because we're here in winter here at the moment, had just been going, oh, well, we don't have COVID-19, so it's okay. I can just, stay, I can just do what I need to do. I don't need to get tested. And that really clearly showed that we had a level of complacency that we were less likely to pick up cases if they appeared. That's what happened. So we have one big cluster at the moment. It's just showing virus spreads in workplaces, in churches, in households. And the way the government has responded has been, again, to try to eliminate. So they've put, so these cases are all in Auckland, our biggest city. And so Auckland was moved, in fact, within 24 hours of them finding the case, Auckland was moved to what we call alert level 3, which is kind of a bit like a lockdown, but it's lockdown with kind of takeaways and online shopping. So businesses can operate, but then can be no customer facing or contact. And then the rest of the country was put at alert level 2, which means that distancing is in place and various things. And so we're trying to
actually wait, Susie, real quick question there about those alert levels. Just a very quick question: are those are like COVID alert levels, right? Are those newly implemented after the coronavirus spread? Or?
Yeah, so they were brought in place, put in place when COVID-19 first started.
Okay.
And so
just to be clear,
Zealand's...
I meant as opposed to some sort of pre-existing emergency program, something like in the United States we have FEMA, which would implement sort of regulations that would be, those would be, you might have them instituted in one crisis and then they get reactivated for the next. It's just interesting, and I want to bring it back to you. But again, unlike the United States, you guys have a national system with sort of regional lockdowns and different levels. I don't know how to put this exactly, but you have sort of different standard levels, whereas in the United States, because things are so regional, because whether it's local, the mandate of the business, states, everything is split up. So it's just interesting. I didn't realize that you had that set up. Anyway, please go ahead.
So it wasn't set up. It wasn't set up originally, but it was brought in. Partly, I'm trying to think what country had our Prime Minister's been very clear that we take things that are working in other countries and we see if we can adapt them to New Zealand. So in New Zealand, we've obviously had things like, fire alerts and, different, I'm thinking of that chart that you see the different colors, what's your fire risk and things. So we've had all those kinds of things. Never had anything like that for infectious diseases. But those alert levels were brought in when in about, I guess, maybe March. And then very quickly, the Prime Minister said, this is how we're going to deal with this. We will move through these levels. And within a few days of her introducing the levels, we were in our first right up at the top level 4 kind of lockdown. And she always said we might need to move up and down the levels and we might do it regionally. And so when this new outbreak started, that's exactly what they did. So within 24 hours, we were moved up the alert levels. It's been quite astonishing to watch.
Susie, can you give me a heads up on, did I pronounce your name correctly? Susie?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. In the United States, it became politicized, unfortunately. And for obvious reasons or for various reasons, but for one of the reasons, it has a thing of cash being kind of one of the things that's one of the movers in our economy. And it was kind of an incentive to get it back going. What was the complacency level in New Zealand? Meaning, were people saying, okay, fair enough, this is a virus, we need to do something about it, so we're going to wear a mask, we're going to social distance? Or was there a bit of consternation? Meaning, was there any kind of group that got into it that tried to push this into saying, no, we don't want to wear a mask, we don't want to get involved with these type of programs? Or did it just go relatively smoothly in comparison to some of the other states or other nations?
So we, when we went into our lockdown first time round, masks weren't really required of anybody. So we haven't had, they've only just been sort of brought in as one of the measures now. So we haven't really had a very big swing against either the lockdowns or the masks. We do have people who don't agree with them, but they are very much in the minority. And all of the like surveys and polls that have been done recently have shown something like 70 to 80% of New Zealanders agree with the government's strategy, which is quite astonishing because we are coming up to an election here too, and there's certainly political things going on where the opposition party are, attacking every possible thing that either goes wrong or hasn't been done fast enough. So it is being politicized here. But
Susie, let me get one question in real quick on what you guys are saying. How did your population deal with not getting an income? Or maybe they did get an income, but how does your government deal with that, with people being locked down if it get mandated a lockdown?
Yeah, so what they did was they brought in a whole bunch of economic policies as well. So that they did it at exactly the same time. So they have a wage subsidy in place. They've tried to do all sorts of things around helping businesses make sure that they have access to easy credit. Everything they could do to make the economic, to cushion the economic impact and make sure that people, weren't forced to to work, really. That's been a big plank. And I think that just shows that you can't have a lockdown without providing that financial support to families. And that's been a really, that was absolutely part of it. And there was no very difficult forms to fill in. It was just a very easy process, and people got the money straight away. So that, I think, was absolutely crucial for the success.
Actually, and so this is this is going to be a biased, maybe funny question to ask, but just I'll just ask it. New Zealand, fairly isolated country, obviously much smaller than its neighbors in the region, and most of the region is non-human. Most of the region is ocean. How much of that do you think would account for the difference in COVID cases? Or, I mean, I'd be charitable. It seems like New Zealand government has responded pretty effectively, but I'm just asking you, do you think how much of that isolation has played a part in the successful COVID response here?
So I think we're less isolated than most people think. We obviously have a very, very big tourism industry, and that has been absolutely decimated. And New Zealanders travel a lot because we are so isolated. So we're moving around all the time. We also, while there's not a huge population, most of New Zealand is empty. We are also situated in, we have big cities and things like that. So I think what we had was time. So, the outbreak came to us a little later. So we got to watch what was happening in China, what was happening in Italy.
Well, when you say time, we can trace it. When are you talking about? So like February or March? When in the process?
Yeah. So we had basically February to watch what was happening and say, and we had at that time, would we be in the position of Italy in a week's time, or was it going to be 2 or 3 weeks' time? And so I think we had the benefit of watching what happened if you didn't act, and a government that said, we're going to take a health response. We do not accept that there's, that it has to be health or the economy, that surely a healthy population would mean a healthy economy. And so that's the approach they took. And they just, they did it at our first confirmed case of community transmission.
Yeah. And another thing, I kind of want to get your perspective. We're speaking to you as a microbiologist, but also just as somebody living in that country. In the U.S., in that period, we obviously responded later and less than you guys did. But in that period, February, March, even extending into April, maybe starting earlier in late January, something like that. But when the virus started to get worrying, I'll put it like that, especially in February, I remember there being this like weird, and I haven't lived through something like this, I don't think, in the U.S. The media environment. I was watching it pretty uniquely at the office and among the public at that time, so I was worried about it. But I remember skepticism, uncertainty, all of this stuff, and I remember it paralyzing our government. What was it like from your perspective in New Zealand, looking at your government? What do you think would the difference have been comparing it to what you see of ours?
So, I guess our Prime Minister was very much looking
1 minute on this.
Out. She spent time
very quick outro.
And, so she was watching what was happening, trying to get all the information about how many intensive care beds did we have, what was our capacity going to be like. And it was really clear that if we didn't act, we were going to be absolutely overwhelmed. And our doctors were going to be doing the same thing that they were in Italy, having to decide who got a ventilator and who didn't. We didn't even have that many ventilators. So I think the looking out and going, what does this mean for us, was really, really important. But I also, I completely acknowledge that we actually, because we're just, we're one country spread over a couple of islands, but we don't have, states or anything like that. We've seen even in Australia, they've had much more difficulty because they've had a federal response, which actually has completely lagged behind many of the states. And so we haven't had that problem of having multiple layers. Our issue has been about our health service and the way that is run. We have these multiple public health units and district health boards, which have massively complicated putting actions into, or putting plans into action, and seeing that differ slightly around the country. But it's been nothing like the challenges that I think other countries like the USA have had to face.
So let's interrupt for the moment. You guys are listening to Susie Wiles, microbiologist. We'll be back in a moment. Fault lines. Thomas Stranahan.
Fault lines. Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with my co-host Shane Stranahan. We have with us Associate Professor Susie Wiles, microbiologist at the University of Auckland, New Zealand, in the areas of molecular medicine and pathology. She studied medical microbiology at the University of Edinburgh, followed by a PhD in microbiology at the Center for Ecology and Hydrology in Oxford. That is an amazing resume, Susie. So I appreciate you for joining us. Let me ask you this. When you guys are looking at the United States, or you're looking out at the various countries around the world, considering how well you guys have done, what have you been shocked by or surprised by in the responses from other countries? For example, when you said the medical boards, well, we don't have medical boards in our country, at least not in the way that I would imagine you guys are constructed. So that would be something that we didn't know about, or that we wouldn't know about unless we're talking to somebody who's there. From your outside looking in perspective, what has been the oddities or peculiarities that you've looked at that you thought was just strange, weird, bizarre, or quirky and good from the various other countries that you've watched?
So I wrote an article about my concerns about the USA. I think maybe at the beginning of March. And what I was really worried about was how this pandemic was going to play out in a country that, doesn't have great healthcare access for people who can't afford it, and also sick leave provisions. So it felt like lots of the things about how the US operates were going to incentivize people to have to work while sick, and that would mean that the virus spread. But I could never have imagined just how terrible the federal response was going to be. We've been reading things in New Zealand about states having to, hire their own private planes to bring in, reagents and protective equipment for their healthcare workers, and things being kind of swiped by the state.
Well,
and that's just
they did. The federal government was stealing some of the supplies. So states had to use this kind of cloak and dagger in order to get various supplies into the country without the federal government basically taking the supplies. It was astonishing.
I mean, I'm speechless at that, and I guess that goes to who's in power at the time. And so I think this is what we've seen around the world is depending on what your government is, who's in power and what their values are, we are seeing this playing out really differently. And those that do value the economy and money over everything else are behaving in a way that fits that rather than a way that actually saves lives. And it's horrifying to watch.
From a microbiological standpoint, what is it with the COVID-19 virus that makes it so pernicious, or for that matter, like either so infective or even going beyond the infective point? It seems to be that there are various people who get the virus, and when they have some other kind of illness associated with it, it makes it that much worse. Or it seems to look for weakness and break, or in order to injure the individual that much worse. It seems to affect them in greater and weirder or more awkward ways because some of the items associated with it are counterintuitive in the way that you would think it works. From a microbiological level, what is the effect of this, or how does this work?
I guess when we think about infectious diseases, so we do have the microbe, and so there's the kind of importance of so what route does it use to spread? Is it through respiratory droplets or the air, or is it through the blood or something like that? So all of that is important. Then you've also got what kind of receptor does the organism use to enter cells, and how many cells is that receptor on? And then obviously how fast it can replicate, and what it does when it gets inside the body, and whether it can impact on healthy people, or whether people with these other illnesses are more affected, and then also when people are infectious. And it feels like with this virus, if you think about having a handful of dice and rolling them, it feels like we have got almost the worst possible score we could have from that set of dice. We have got something that's incredibly infectious and is infectious before people realize they're infectious, has this, it really does impact not only on healthy people, but on those with other, diabetes, all sorts of other things. And it infects cells, or it uses a receptor that infects not just cells in the nose and throat, but all sorts of cells in our body. And so we've really struck it very unlucky with this one. It could be worse. It could be more deadly, but frankly, this is bad enough, right? So it's almost actually kind of not, if it was worse, people might be responding or taking it more seriously. But the fact people are just saying, oh, it's just like a flu, it's really not helpful, because, the flu is bad enough, but this is so much worse.
Yeah, we've seen that. I mean, we've seen that for months since the beginning. How about you guys with the conspiracy theories? Are those circulating quite as much over there, or are those more American?
No, they've reached us here. That's the joy of the internet. They're maybe not quite so prominent here, but I worry that they're growing. Really weirdly, I've been implicated in one of the conspiracy theories. So, and I've had lots and lots of messages from people who genuinely believe that I'm part of it. So
this is, I know what this is. I don't mean this is luciferase, right?
Yes.
Go for it. What is this again?
So one of the conspiracies is thought to be named, or the plot. It's essentially thought to be a plot based on Bill Gates wanting to vaccinate everybody or something. But apparently the plot is called luciferase, and so I actually work on bacteria, and one of the diseases that I study is tuberculosis. And my research interests are basically making bacteria glow in the dark. And the way we do that is using these enzymes called luciferases, which come from fireflies and creatures like that. And so the fact that I work on something called luciferase, and my work in the past has been funded by the Gates Foundation, means that people actually believe that I am actively working on this thing. And they just, the luciferase enzymes were named a long time ago and had nothing to do with Lucifer, but somehow it's become now this all twisted into this apparently satanic plot. And it's incredible watching how you can take bits of information, how people can take bits of information that in themselves are just like facts, and then turn them and swirl them into something quite extraordinary.
It is actually a very, very quick and specific question on that, not related to COVID, but literally just because I'm curious. It's luciferase, which relates to luciferin, which seems to be the actual light-emitting compound, and I'm seeing it listed in fireflies and snails in different species. Fireflies, that's probably the most sort of charismatic species. That's the one we would recognize. But is this, among other species, just real quick, is this the one that's actually responsible for bioluminescence pretty much among all species that we see emitting light? Or is this just a sort of main class of those compounds?
So they get the name luciferin and luciferase, but they're different chemicals. So the luciferin and luciferase from fireflies is a very similar chemical set that's in most insects, but bacteria glow in the dark, and they have a very different chemical set of luciferin and luciferases. And then there are other ones for creatures in the sea. So we have these generic names for different chemicals. But fireflies are one of the predominant ones, certainly in insects.
Okay, yeah. Go for it, Jamarl. Yeah, I don't want to take up more time.
Well, I was going to say, I thought Shane was going in the exact same direction that I was with this the moment that she said that. But if I was a doctor, let's say I was working with you, and let's say I was really committed to my job, like passionate, extremely passionate like a Marvel movie passionate. And I said, I'm going to inject these into my baby, my child, my infant. What would need to happen in order for you to inject those bioluminescence into an infant that can also now harness the power of this mutant latent ability? And what would they experience if they were trying to use that bioluminescence as a mutant ability? You've piqued my interest on this. I thought this was where Shane was going.
Oh, man. Okay. Oh, man. Yeah, Jamarl, you read my mind. Anyway, Susie, go for it.
So again, it's a complete misunderstanding, and it's based on a piece of research that was published that was about putting. So the idea is that if you gave somebody a vaccine, that you could put a little like a marker in with the vaccine so that somebody could say, yes, that person has been vaccinated or not, and you would do that using what they were proposing was something called, I think, a quantum dot or something. So you can use something that basically, how to describe this? It will emit light. But you need to give it light to make it emit light. So actually, this is called fluorescence, not bioluminescence. So when you have a protein or a chemical that when you hit it with light, it then emits light at a different wavelength. And so what this paper that people have latched onto was describing was using the luciferases as the way to activate the light. So you have the luciferases on the outside, and you use that to activate this chemical that's being used in the, on the inside, say under your skin. Actually, this is how jellyfish glow. So jellyfish have this amazing protein called green fluorescent protein, or GFP, but they also have luciferases, and the luciferases are the ones that produce bioluminescence and produce light, and then they turn the fluorescent protein on.
That's
so the way you could do this, you don't even need luciferases. You just use torch, right? You just need to shine light at it. Luciferases is just one way to do it.
Totally. Now, just real quick you already said this, but just to sort of restate it, the luciferase in that case would be emitting the compound that would be bioluminescence, a chemical reaction, and then the fluorescence would basically, this is a dumb and it's not exactly right, but it would sort of be refracting the light that's already emitted. It would be taking that light in, changing its frequency, and putting it out at a different form. That's the simple way of what you're saying?
Yeah, it's to do with what the electrons are doing. And so basically, if you emit light, you shine light on the electrons, they move out of their orbits, and then they emit the light at a different wavelength. So yeah, there's physics and chemistry all involved in this. But the important thing is it's not the luciferases that get injected. It's the luciferases that could be used as part of the way to turn that system on and detect what has been injected. But as I say, luciferases would be a very silly way of doing that when you could just shine a torch at somebody.
I see. And this would be
fair enough.
Chemical signaling stuff inside the body or something like that. Like if you're trying to use this as a marker for tracking things or tying things down, is that the idea?
Yeah. I mean, all you need, we do this already. It's just a tattoo. You would just need, and there are tattoos already that glow in the dark, right? Or glow under UV light. So that's all it is using a dye that basically changes color or emits a signal when you shine light at it.
I see.
Susan, that's fine, but I want my kid to have the immune ability to emit light. So you're saying not luciferase, but what if you use the other ones? So say, for example, you convince me, say, look, that's a stupid way to do it. If you want your kid to have immune ability to shine like that, you need to use these other things. Is it still possible?
Well, yes. And the Firefly one is the one that's been used the most. And so we do this by essentially genetically engineering. So there are, within science, we have rabbits and mice and all sorts of things where we've taken particular genes that we're interested in looking at when they're turned on and off. And you basically hook them up with this luciferase gene. And that means that basically if you add the luciferin for the reaction, then if that gene is expressed, then the animal glows. So this has been done with, as I say, with rabbits, with mice, but they don't glow very brightly. So you are very unlikely to see it without very specialized sensitive equipment.
That's so fascinating.
I have seen that. No, but a lot of people have seen this. We've got to actually go out now. Thank you for joining us, Susie. But a lot of people have seen the glow in the dark rabbits. If you do searches on YouTube, you can find those glow in the dark rabbits. And like you're saying, they are glow in the dark. It's they have to be in a room of approaching complete darkness to see them because it's subtle. But interesting.
Yeah, and actually they use that GFP generally use the GFP from the jellyfish.
Yeah, the green fluorescent protein, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, Susie, thank you for joining us.
That's so cool.
My pleasure.
All right, bye.
Thank you. You guys were listening.
Okay, so we're out there. We're still going on the stream, or maybe that's ending. But yeah, thank you, Susie. We're gonna be putting these.
You guys have been listening to a pre-recorded segment by Susie Wiles from New Zealand. She's an associate professor of microbiologist at the University of Auckland, New Zealand, in the area of molecular medicine and pathology. She studied medical microbiology at the University of Edinburgh, followed by a PhD in microbiology at the Center for Ecology and Hydrology in Oxford. This is Fault Lines, Thomas Stranahan. Shout out to Andre, producer, Raheem, and of course my co-host Shane. We will see you next week. Thanks all. All right, guys, this is Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I'm going to have to leave today because I unfortunately have surgery. No, I don't love it. Yes, have to sometimes do it, and this is one of those times. Let me explain something though before I go. When I look at protests, I look at protests from as if I was perched on the world. And I know that when those protests take place, they're taking place not because those people want to be there, but because something has dug into those people to such a degree that they drag themselves from the house and they throw themselves in what they think is right. Sometimes they're more right than others. Sometimes it's more violent than others. But ultimately, your society has created a pretext that has allowed something, some deficit of justice, social, be it criminal, or be it economic, that is dug into them to such a degree that this is where they are. That's a societal thing. I don't need to give a yay or nay on that. My opinion in that fact doesn't really matter. Do I think it could be used in other ways? Yes. Does that matter? No, because many of those people aren't looking at that in political ways. They're looking at it as something is bothering them. If you're talking about the youth doing that, they were probably doing that for economic reasons. You have a world where you are basically forcing them, putting this thing up, saying, hey, sign this, give me your life, $50,000 I'm going to put on your back. Your insurance, your ability to get a job, all of those things. You've put these people in dire straits. There's a reason why people were going for Sanders, the Medicare for All policy, the elimination of student debt and free schools. All of those things were policies that dramatically affected their life. Ripped away. And on top of that, the secondary argument. Are you willing to fight for somebody as much as you're willing to fight for yourself? George Floyd set the pretext. All of those years, decades of injustice, and nobody who's comfortable said shit about it. But now, everybody wants to sit in their chair and point fingers from their comfortable place. Here's the bare bones reality of it. Whatever reality that they were living in, whatever existence they were living in, difficulties of that existence, you would never see. And if I'm being bluntly honest, the country typically doesn't care. When those people start to express everything that they built up over the course of God knows how many years of their life, and they come to the conclusion this is not fair. Whether it's cops killing 1,000 people a year and 1% getting prosecuted and 30% of that 1% taking prison time. Whether it's living in a situation where you recognize that your parents and your parents before them lived in a certain degree of squalor, and you are affected by the lineage to which you come from. Nothing that you chose, all of it, baked into the cake of your very existence when you were born. When you realize that's not fair, you take a certain perspective of the world. If you're living in a community that is violent, that incentivizes crime, and you grow up in that, is that fair to you? Did you choose that? No. You had a society that didn't care. And that society breeds a certain degree of alienation. I would imagine that you have various reasons that people are out there. Some people are just scoundrels and just want to do bad shit. But I would imagine that the preponderance of the people who are out there because something is digging into them. Now, does this justify violence? It depends. Did the violence that was on them for all of those years, was that justified? And I guess you could say no. But the catch is, whether you would say yay or nay on that, it doesn't really matter. It's baked into the cake. That doesn't change. And because that doesn't change, the people who you are creating that go out there and do that also don't change. You're creating your monsters. And you're shocked that they're monsters. Extremes create extremes. You killed a black man nearly 9 minutes on his throat casually. And you see these over and over and over again. And you can see a skew in the percentage. And one more point. If you're looking at Kenosha, 32% unemployment for African Americans. That number is astonishing. It gets that much more astonishing when you start looking into some of the other metrics to this. This is Bloomberg. More than half of the African American neighborhoods in the state are actually jails. Not only that, but the rest of the black neighborhoods across the state are either apartment complexes, Section 8 housing, or homeless shelters. The lone exception being a working middle-class neighborhood in Milwaukee. That's their existence. Now, if that's your life, if you have a situation where it is easier to basically do crime, perhaps, or you have a society that has criminalized your society to such a degree, whichever one that is, whichever side you want to fall down, I'm making the point that both of those things are wrong. They're failures. Those are not pluses of a system. Those are failures of a system. And you're shocked. Like, that's the part that always shocks me. That people are like, oh, I don't like that. I don't like that balance. Look, when I get on here talking about poverty, and I'm talking about it from personal experience, and you have an individual that's trying to do something for their child that they can't do, you have an individual that has to deal with somebody who's sick, and they have no capability to do it, what do you think happens to that person? It digs into them. You have some people that express that externally, that says, no, I am going to figure a way out of this by hook or by crook, and they go about it. And they do what they got to do. You have other people who get depressed. You have other people who have children that have high mortality rate, especially among African Americans, who live shorter lives and who live lives in destitution with a higher percentage of passing that on to their kid who's going to live in something similar. Do people get out of it? Yes. Do many people get out of it? No. You have to deal with this. Your society doesn't. So instead, something sets off a spark. And all of those injustices, all of those things that have plagued these people, all of these people who know these things are wrong somehow, even if they can't necessarily express it, they express what have been implanted upon them. Now, if you're asking me, am I going to sit here and condemn that? No, how can I? Because for me to condemn that, I would basically have to ignore the precursors that set that up. What I do, I look at it and say, this is a mechanical process. A sets off B. Whatever I think of it, it doesn't matter. A sets off B. It would be weird if it didn't. When people have a deficit in them, when they think there's a deficit of justice, they respond. The catch for your society is to build a society that has accountability for its justice system, that is fair in the dispensation of that justice, that gives a priority towards life in the dispensation of that justice. And more importantly, getting rid of poverty. A Green New Deal, or for that matter, a jobs guarantee, would ameliorate many of those concerns in Kenosha. How am I wrong? You have 32% unemployment. You have a situation where it's easier, I would imagine, to go one way than the other. And in this very specific instance, I'm making the point that the poverty rate and the crime rate are related. It's already known. Your society chooses consciously to throw in cops into situations that cops can't do, as a flat fact. Instead of dealing with poverty in real terms, they build jails. That's cheaper than saying we need to deal with reparations, or we need to deal with things that can ameliorate the hard edges of our system, like a Medicare for All program, expansion of Social Security. If people get old, they give their muscles and their brains to our society. They shouldn't go broke. They shouldn't go poor when they get older. Or for that matter, they get sick. Our society should care about them more than that. I'm making the point that your society has every capability in the world to do those things. It chooses not to. So the chaos that is visited upon an aspect, let's say roughly 50% of your society, and when that 50% gets set off, it's unpredictable. Your job is to not let it get that way. Your job as a society, if you're talking about an honest-to-God society, is to come together and say, how can we eliminate the poverty? How can we eliminate the precursors to these things that set people off, that dig into them so that every waking moment of their life is spent in that jail cell? And I don't mean from the standpoint of being in a jail cell. I mean from the standpoint of the limitations that have been about your economic circumstance. Think people want to be poor? For fuck's sake, my mom worked 40 hours a week. And in working that 40 hours a week, my mom still was dirt poor. And the difficulties, the depression, the notion of sense of self and the context of the shit that you see around you. There's a reason why violence goes up when people show off their wealth, because people recognize that they are being screwed over in an economic system in this kind of impersonal way that allows the rich to do what they do, the comfortable class to be who they be, and everybody else to suffer in silence. And when that suffering stops being in silence and starts being visited on your society indiscriminately, but so is the violence that takes place to the individual, to the families when they are in lack, or when they are in a sense of violence from being in a sense of lack because that's the only community they could be in, or when they are preyed on by cops that basically get off with a 99% chance of doing so. You can go around on this. Understand your situation for the moment, just African Americans. And what I'm talking about, this is talking about multiracial, black, white, gay, straight, doesn't matter to me. It's a class issue. Part of it is race, yes, in the way that sometimes the justice system engages or the way cops engage, yes. But ultimately, what we're talking about is class, because race and class are intrinsically linked. And I would rather build a broad coalition of people who find themselves in this group that says, this is what we want, and can articulate that as a demand. The people who are in the streets, the problem is that at that level of your decision space is so constrained, you have no capacity to deal with it. Even if you burn shit down, even if you do tit for tat, where every time a black person is killed, you riot and you take shit down and burn shit down. Even if you do that, I get the tit for tat. You've murdered somebody that is important to us. And just like any other country, when there's a conflict, you evoke your energies in order to get across, we can do that too. And you will not do that without consequence. Again, unfortunately, just like in every other war, it's indiscriminate. The cop kills this person he didn't necessarily know. So he didn't necessarily get, they had a family that loved them, a mom that loved them, a dad that loved them, a cousin, children that loved them. He didn't give a shit about that because in that moment he was in fight or flight and his point of view was to put him down. Did he have to do it? No. Did he do it? Yes. Will people justify it? Absolutely. Look, my basic point in all of this is you can't, it makes zero sense to allow a process that puts people in difficult straits, whatever those straits are, and your society okays it, alienates it. And the moment that those people are alienated, have a certain degree of anger at the other side of that equation. And when a spark hits, some people visit that in violent ways. There will always be a percentage or probability that do such. I look at this and say, stop the other part. You get rid of this part. Nobody wants to do that. No one wants to focus on this issue of poverty or anything else. Everyone wants to focus on the secondary part of stop those people from doing X or stop those people from doing Y. It's not magic. It's a mechanical process. It's a deficit of justice. You can argue that they don't know how to process that. They don't have people who can help them process that anger into a way that's effective. Yes, I agree. You can make a point that says the taking down those cafes or burning those cafes, burning those other buildings or businesses that is in the area, beating people up. It's indiscriminate. It's disgusting. Every bit as much as disgusting from the standpoint of them, of the killing of this person. And for the fact that this has gone on in perpetuity back decades, hundreds of years. I don't have to like it. This is a cynical appraisal. But my appraisal is right. And nothing in this appraisal has been an affirmative, or for that matter, I guess you can say, a disagreement. I guess I nothing it. Because I don't have any, it would be strange for me to say 2 is on this side of the equation, but we don't balance it. And that can go on in perpetuity without something taking place. And the fact that your society already knows that, accepts it, with a comfortable class that, yeah, dislikes it, but a class above that is utterly detached. I mean, when Democrats go home, all of these people are millionaires. You understand that in Congress. All of them. Millionaires, billionaires. Or not billionaires, but millionaires. $100 million on Nancy Pelosi. Do you think that their processing of the world is similar to yours? I'm telling you, it is not. I promise you 1,000% it is not. They live in a fundamentally different world than you do. And if that is true, then how the fuck are they in Congress leading and writing legislation that's in your best interest? You, in processing your day, often have feedback mechanisms that control your behavior and how you act and so forth, and keep a certain degree of, let's say, a balancing effect. They live in a bubble. And with the money that they have, an ungodly sum, it is hard for you to get your head around how much money that allows them to act, behave, and how much freedom that allows in comparison to you. They can take that break. They can take that vacation. They're not affected by this stuff. All of it is intellectual for them. It doesn't dig in them. That's why there's no sense of urgency in the way that they act. You are not entirely going to get what you want through either of these parties. And that's the problem. There's no attentiveness to what is taking place in the streets. Meaning, cop kills somebody, cops kill 1,000 people a year. Bam, they kill somebody. The public sees it. The public reacts. There's no political instrument to answer. The only thing in a political instrument is law and order. There's never anything that says, yes, I acknowledge what you're saying. And yes, you're right. Whether it's the kids in D.C. that is pushing up against Rand Paul, whether it's the people in Detroit, or Portland, or for that matter, Wisconsin, all of these people have a point. And either you're going to listen to their point or not. And in almost mechanical terms, if you ignore them, this will continue to happen. An element of your society has been alienated. It doesn't believe the social contract works for them. It doesn't believe the social contract is even in their interest at this point, that nobody fucking cares, that there's apathy. You do realize the very point of somebody having to say, my life matters, gets across that that individual thinks he has to say it. That whoever he's dealing with doesn't believe that, or is at the very least apathetic towards it. I'll leave it. I mean, I guess I'm aggravated by this topic because I don't like this comfortable class that doesn't necessarily have to deal with that stuff to just point their finger and judge. And it's like, yes, I hate the fact that they are destroying that bakery. I hate the fact that they're beating that guy up. I don't like that shit. I don't like that shit any more than I like the straits that we put people in and we allow people to be in. And being as somebody who lived and grew up in that, and to some degree, who, worked my way out of it, just I have a temperament of competition. And I have a temperament of I have X that I want, etc. Now, everyone has a temperament. Those people are not wrong for having that temperament, whoever that person is. There are a lot of people who do that. I guess my very basic point is being able to see between the various levels, you can see the massive difference, even from the standpoint of incomes that are not massive, between somebody who's making $20,000 a year and somebody who's making, let's say, 60 or 70. Because what you realize is, oh my God, you realize how little that person has to work with and how much their life is imperiled by anything that takes place from an economic standpoint because they're so limited in the economic realm. And your economic realm is how I eat, where I stay, if my neighborhood is safe, am I going to have to be able to pay for my kid, am I going to be able to pay my car note, my rent, etc., etc., etc. Ignore that at your own peril. Be comfortable at your own peril. But at some point, the mob comes. When the mob gets to the point where it's fed up. Those people are not in D.C. for no reason. There are reasons. Whether you choose to accept that as being justifiable or not is irrelevant. You may disagree with it. Somebody else may agree with it. It's point of view. Violence is the way this country speaks and the way the country responds. Look at around the world and look at the militarized cops. Order. And we do so by violence. We don't do so by dealing with the material issues and concerns of your population, which is kind of my point. Cops have no capability of doing that. That's acts of law. Those are things that take place through movements when they change the situation to which we organize ourselves. Until then, this is America. It's always weird when you take somebody to court and the judge is wagging their finger, throwing the book at the person, and no one ever asks, what did your society do to make that person what that person is? Because when that person came into the world, they were not destined to be anything. They became who they were purely and entirely from the experiences that they had in your society, your city, your government, your country. What did you do to fuck him up? And while you say, yeah, that person may have agency, but that agency and everything else is still enshrined within the context of the imagination and what their capabilities and what they thought they could do within the context of your world. If you had a jobs guarantee, a lot of this goes away. But we don't have a jobs guarantee. We don't have the ability to ensure that those people can go to school or those people can do X or Y. Meaning, you provide options. This is kind of like having trash cans on the side of the road. You're more inclined to throw something in the trash as opposed to throwing something on the floor if the trash can is right there. Your society should be the same in regards to jobs, in regards to opportunity, college, etc., etc., etc. But that's not how we are. And so we accept this. People wag their finger. People get upset. People bitch, moan. You have people who are unfairly targeted. You have other people who are unfairly hit on both sides. And this is the world we accept because we don't want, in real terms, to change the factors regarding issues of poverty, issues of community, issues of wealth, and yeah, dealing with the material concerns of your population where they're not so alienated that they believe that they need to strike out in such ways. Like, share, and subscribe. I'm running late. I have surgery today. I'm sorry, but I wanted to talk about that.